They said she'd gone mad, standing by that fence every sunset for 5 years, clutching letters that would never be answered. The townspeople of Clearwater, Wyoming whispered behind gloved hands about Evelyn Moore, the woman who waited for a ghost. But what they didn't know was that the truth was buried with Captain James Albright in a Colorado grave, and the cowboy who carried that secret was riding toward her fence post right now. This is a story about broken promises, unanswered prayers, and the kind of love that refuses to die even when hope should. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The Wyoming wind had a voice of its own, and Evelyn Moore had learned every word it spoke. It whispered through the prairie grass in the morning, murmured across the plains at noon, and by evening, it howled with a loneliness that matched the ache in her chest. She stood at the fence post on the eastern edge of her property, the same place she'd stood every evening for the past 5 years, 3 months and 14 days. Not that she was counting, except she was. Of course she was. The letters were bound with a blue ribbon that had faded to gray, the edges frayed from her fingers tracing them over and over. 23 letters in total, every one of them unanswered, every one of them a prayer sent into the void. "Evelyn, come inside, it's getting cold." Her younger sister Margaret stood on the porch of the weathered farmhouse, arms wrapped around herself against the April chill. At 19, Margaret was everything Evelyn had once been. Hopeful, bright-eyed, full of dreams about the future. Now at 28, Evelyn felt ancient, carved hollow by waiting. "Just a few more minutes," Evelyn called back, though they both knew it was a lie. She would stay until the last light bled from the sky, until the stars emerged one by one like puncture wounds in the darkness, until her feet were numb and her hands trembled from more than just the cold. Margaret sighed, a sound Evelyn had heard so many times it had become part of the evening ritual. The creak of the porch, the sigh, the eventual retreat back into the warmth of the house. Then Evelyn would be alone with the wind and the letters and the memory of a promise made in dust and desperation. "I'll come back for you, Evelyn. I swear on everything holy. Once this war is over, once I've served my time, I'm coming back to make you my wife." Captain James Albright had said those words with his hands cupping her face, his blue eyes intense with conviction. It was September of 1868, and he was shipping out with his cavalry unit to fight in the Indian Wars. They'd known each other only 3 months, a whirlwind courtship born from a chance meeting at the Mercantile in Cheyenne. He'd been buying supplies. She'd been buying flour. Their hands had touched, reaching for the same bolt of blue fabric, and that simple collision had felt like destiny. 3 months of stolen moments, of walks along the river, of kisses that tasted like hope and possibility. 3 months of falling so completely, so recklessly in love, that when he'd asked her to wait for him, she'd said yes without hesitation. "I'll write every week," he'd promised, "and when the war is done, I'll send for you. We'll have that ranch we talked about, raise horses, fill a house with children. I promise you, Evelyn. I promise." The first year, 6 letters had arrived. They came sporadically, some water-stained, some torn at the corners. But they came. James wrote about the harsh conditions, the endless miles of riding, the homesickness that kept him awake at night. He wrote about his dreams for their future, the ranch he'd buy with his army pay, the house he'd build with his own hands, the life they'd make together. "I think about you every day," he'd written in March of 1869. "Your smile keeps me warm on the coldest nights. Your voice is what I hear when the guns fall silent. Wait for me, my darling. I'm coming home." Evelyn had written back twice for every letter she received. She told him about the farm, about Margaret's suitors, about the new church being built in town. She told him she loved him, that she was counting the days, that her hope never wavered. She addressed every letter with careful precision. Captain James Albright, 7th Cavalry Regiment, Fort Laramie, Wyoming Territory. Then Fort Collins, Colorado Territory. Then Fort Lyon, following his unit as best she could from the fragments of information in his letters. The second year, only 2 letters arrived. Both brief, both formal, in a way that made her stomach knot with worry. But she told herself he was busy, that the war demanded his attention, that his love hadn't changed even if his letters had grown sparse. The third year, nothing came. The fourth year, silence. Now in the 5th year, the silence had become so heavy it felt like a physical thing pressing against her chest. "He's not coming back, Evelyn." She hadn't heard her father approach, but there he was, standing a few feet behind her with his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. Robert Moore was a practical man, a farmer, who dealt in seeds and seasons, not in dreams and distant promises. "You don't know that," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the familiar ache of this argument. "It's been 5 years. If he was coming, he'd be here by now." "But the war could still be keeping him. The Indian wars have been over for 2 years, Evie. You know that. Everyone knows that." The nickname made her flinch. Her father only called her Evie when he was trying to be gentle, trying to soften a blow. She preferred it when he was harsh. Harshness she could fight against. Gentleness just made her want to cry. "Maybe he lost the address," she said, knowing how weak it sounded. "Maybe he was injured and couldn't write. Maybe he found someone else. Maybe he never meant those promises. Maybe he was killed, God rest him, and nobody thought to inform the girl he left behind." Her father's voice wasn't cruel, just tired. "You can't spend the rest of your life waiting at this fence, Evelyn. At some point, you have to accept that he's gone." "I made a promise too," she whispered. "I told him I'd wait. I told him I'd be here when he came back. And you've kept that promise. For 5 years you've kept it. But how long is enough? How long until you're allowed to live your own life?" Evelyn didn't answer. She couldn't. Because the truth was, she didn't know how to stop waiting. The waiting had become who she was. Every morning she woke up thinking maybe today. Every evening she stood at this fence thinking maybe tomorrow. The hoping and the waiting had carved grooves so deep in her soul that she didn't know what would be left of her if she stopped. Her father squeezed her shoulder once, then walked back to the house, his boots crunching on the frost-hardened ground. Evelyn stayed where she was, watching the sun sink toward the horizon like a dying ember. The sky bled orange and pink and purple, colors so beautiful they hurt. In town, she knew what people said about her. She'd heard the whispers in the mercantile, seen the pitying looks from the women at church. "Poor Evelyn Moore," they'd say. "Lost her mind waiting for a man who clearly doesn't want her. Should have married Jacob Thompson when she had the chance. Pride goeth before a fall." Jacob Thompson had proposed 2 years ago, a decent offer from a decent man who owned the hardware store in Clearwater. He was 43, never married, steady and reliable as winter. Evelyn had declined as gently as she could, and Jacob had accepted with a nod that said he'd expected nothing less. "The offer stands," he'd told her. "When you're ready to stop waiting, I'll be here." But she wasn't ready. She might never be ready, because somewhere deep in her bones, beneath the doubt and the fear and the creeping despair, she still believed. She still felt it, that certainty that James Albright had loved her truly, that his promises had been real, that something beyond his control had kept him from coming back. The last letter she'd received, in August of 1870, had been different from the others. Shorter, yes, but also urgent in a way that had made her read it a dozen times, searching for hidden meaning between the lines. "My dearest Evelyn, I think of you constantly. These months away have been harder than I could have imagined, but I hold fast to the hope of our future together. There are things I cannot write about in a letter, dangers I cannot name, but know that my love for you has not diminished. If anything should happen to me, know that you were the best part of my life, the reason I fought to survive each day. Wait for me, my darling. I'm trying to get home. Your devoted, James." If anything should happen to me. Those words had terrified her then and haunted her still. What had he meant? What danger had he been facing? And why, in the 5 years since that letter, had nothing else come? "Miss Evelyn?" She turned to find young Timothy Baker standing at the edge of the property, his cheeks flushed from running. Timothy was 14, all gangly limbs and perpetual enthusiasm, the son of the town's postmaster. "There's people coming," Timothy said, slightly out of breath. "A whole cattle drive coming through town tomorrow. My pa said they'll be here by noon, staying a few days to rest the herd before pushing on to the rail station in Cheyenne. Thought you'd want to know, since some of the men might need lodging and your ma mentioned you had those spare rooms." Evelyn nodded. Her mother had been taking in lodgers occasionally since her father's harvest had been poor 2 years running. The extra income helped, and it wasn't much work. Clean sheets, hot meals, basic hospitality. Thank you, Timothy. Tell your mother I'll have 2 rooms ready if needed. The boy grinned and sprinted off, disappearing into the gathering dusk like a spirit. Evelyn watched him go, envying his energy, his uncomplicated joy. When had she lost that? Had it been gradual, a slow erosion of hope? Or had it happened all at once, the day she'd realized the letters had stopped coming? She looked down at the bundle in her hands. 23 letters, each one read so many times the words were burned into her memory. She could recite them in her sleep, and often did, waking with James's promises on her lips like prayers. The wind picked up, colder now, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Spring in Wyoming was unpredictable. Snow one day, sunshine the next, always keeping you guessing. Rather like life, Evelyn thought bitterly. Just one more minute, she whispered to the empty prairie. One more minute, and then I'll go inside. But minutes turned to half an hour, and half an hour stretched until the stars emerged in their thousands, diamond bright against the velvet black. Evelyn stood at her fence post, clutching her letters, waiting for a man who would never come, while somewhere in the darkness, the truth she'd been waiting 5 years to hear was finally riding her way. Well, the next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of April day that promised warmth but delivered ice. Evelyn woke before sunrise, as she always did, her body tuned to the rhythms of farm life. She dressed quickly in the dim pre-dawn light, a simple cotton dress in faded brown, an apron tied at her waist, her dark hair pinned back in a practical bun. The mirror on her dresser showed a face she barely recognized anymore, hollow-cheeked, shadows beneath gray-green eyes, a mouth that had forgotten how to smile without effort. When did I become this? She wondered, not for the first time. When did I turn into a ghost? Downstairs, her mother was already in the kitchen, kneading dough for the morning bread. Catherine Moore was 56, still strong and capable despite the lines the harsh Wyoming life had carved into her face. She looked up as Evelyn entered, her expression carefully neutral. "Coffee's ready," she said, "and we'll need to air out the spare rooms. Timothy said 6 men from the cattle drive might need lodging." 6? Evelyn reached for a mug, grateful for something to focus on besides her thoughts. That's more than usual. It's a big drive, apparently, nearly 1,000 head coming up from Texas, bound for the rail station. The trail boss is looking for decent beds and home-cooked meals before the final push to Cheyenne. Catherine shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. "Good money, if we can accommodate them." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the familiar routine of morning chores requiring no discussion. Evelyn swept the kitchen, helped her mother prepare the spare rooms, gathered eggs from the henhouse, and tried not to count how many hours until evening when she could return to her fence post. Margaret appeared around 8, yawning and complaining about the cold as only a 19-year-old could. She was prettier than Evelyn had ever been, with golden hair and blue eyes and a laugh that came easily. She had 3 suitors currently vying for her attention, and she entertained their efforts with the casual confidence of someone who had never known heartbreak. "I heard about the Cowboys," Margaret said, pouring herself coffee. "Mary Thompson said some of them are quite handsome. Rough, but handsome." "Cowboys are always rough," their mother said mildly. "That's the nature of the work." "I think it's romantic, driving cattle across the frontier, sleeping under the stars, living free without walls or rules." Margaret's eyes went dreamy. "Don't you think it's romantic, Evelyn?" Evelyn, who had spent 5 years waiting for a man who lived exactly that kind of life, found nothing romantic about it. "I think it's hard work and dangerous conditions. Romance is for novels." Margaret's face fell. "You used to believe in romance. You used to talk about love like it was something magical." "That was a long time ago." "It was 5 years ago. And you're only 28, Evie, not ancient. You could still—" She caught their mother's warning look and fell silent, but the words hung unspoken in the air. You could still find someone else. You could still have a life. At noon, the cattle drive arrived. Evelyn was in the vegetable garden turning soil in preparation for spring planting when she heard them. The low rumbling thunder of 1,000 hooves, the shouts of men, the occasional whistle meant to keep the herd moving. She straightened, shading her eyes against the noon sun, and watched as the massive column of cattle flowed past their property like a living river. Longhorns mostly, their distinctive horns catching the light. The animals moved with the steady determination of creatures that had traveled far and had farther yet to go. Flanking them were the cowboys, lean men on horseback, covered in dust, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats. They rode with an easy grace that spoke of months in the saddle, their attention always on the herd, anticipating trouble before it could manifest. At the front of the drive, Evelyn spotted a man who must be the trail boss. He sat his horse with quiet authority, his eyes constantly scanning, his movements economical and precise. Something about him caught her attention, maybe the calm way he handled his mount or the way the other cowboys deferred to him without obvious command. He turned his head, and for a moment Evelyn could have sworn he looked directly at her. Then the moment passed. The drive moved on toward the temporary holding pens on the edge of town, and Evelyn returned to her garden with dirt under her nails and an odd flutter in her chest she couldn't quite explain. That evening, 6 men arrived at the Moore farmhouse, hats in hands, asking about lodging. The trail boss, Caleb Ross, he introduced himself, did the talking, his voice low and respectful. "We're looking for clean beds and hot food for 3 nights, ma'am," he said to Catherine. "We can pay fair rate and promise no trouble. My men know how to behave in respectable company." Catherine quoted a price. Caleb nodded without haggling. "That's more than fair. We're grateful for the hospitality." 5 of the cowboys headed to the bunkhouse, a converted barn her father had fitted with cots years ago for seasonal workers. But Caleb hesitated, his gaze moving to the young boy at his side. The child was maybe 8 years old, thin as a rail, with enormous dark eyes that held too much sorrow for such a young face. "If you have one more bed available," Caleb said quietly, "I'd like to keep the boy in the house, if that's acceptable. He's not comfortable with large groups." Catherine's expression softened. "Of course. The room at the top of the stairs. But the child looks half-starved. When did he last eat properly?" "It's been a difficult journey," Caleb said, his jaw tight. Something about the way he said it suggested more story than he was willing to share. The boy, Tommy, Caleb called him, said nothing. He just stood there, clutching a battered tin soldier, his eyes fixed on the ground. Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest, some sealed-off place she'd been protecting for 5 years. "I'll make extra supper," she heard herself say. "And there's fresh bread? A growing boy needs more than trail rations." Caleb's eyes met hers for the first time, really met them, and Evelyn saw something there that startled her. Recognition, maybe. Or kinship. The look of one lost soul seeing another. "Thank you," he said simply. "That's very kind." That night, Evelyn made the biggest supper she'd cooked in months. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans from the root cellar, fresh bread with butter, and apple pie for dessert. The cowboys in the bunkhouse got generous portions too, delivered by Margaret, who came back giggling about the compliments they'd paid her cooking, even though she'd had nothing to do with it. At the main house table, Caleb ate with quiet appreciation, but Evelyn's attention was on Tommy. The boy picked at his food with mechanical movements, eating because he was told to, not because he wanted to. His eyes remained downcast, his small body hunched as if expecting a blow. "How long have you been on the trail, Mr. Ross?" Catherine asked, making conversation. "Near 4 months now. We started in southern Texas, worked our way north. It's been a hard drive. Lost some cattle in a stampede outside Dodge City, had to detour around Comanche territory, dealt with rustlers twice." Caleb spoke matter-of-factly, but Evelyn heard the exhaustion beneath the words. "This drive's had more than its share of trouble." "And the boy?" Catherine's voice was gentle. "Is he your son?" "No, ma'am." Caleb's expression darkened. "His mother was... She was traveling with a wagon train that crossed our path 3 weeks back. She took sick with fever, died before we could get her to a doctor. Tommy's got no other family that he knows of. I couldn't leave him alone out there." Silence fell over the table. Margaret's eyes welled with tears. Catherine reached over and squeezed Tommy's hand, but the boy didn't respond, didn't even seem to notice. "He hasn't spoken since she died," Caleb added quietly. "Doc in the last town said it's the shock, said he needs time and care. But I can't give him that, not on the trail. I was hoping maybe in Clearwater someone might—" He trailed off, the impossibility of the request hanging unfinished. You want someone to take him in, Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. Caleb met her eyes again, and this time she saw the desperate hope there. He deserves better than a life trailing cattle. He deserves a home, a school, people who'll care for him proper. I know it's a lot to ask of strangers, but I'll ask around, Catherine interrupted. There are good people in this town. Someone will help. But even as her mother spoke, Evelyn saw the doubt in Caleb's face. She understood it. Taking in an orphan, a traumatized child who wouldn't speak, who'd watched his mother die, that was asking a lot of any family, especially on the frontier where everyone already had more than enough hardship to manage. That night, after the dishes were washed and the house had settled into quiet, Evelyn found herself standing in the doorway of Tommy's room. The boy was sitting on the bed, still dressed, still clutching his tin soldier, staring at nothing. "May I come in?" she asked softly. No response. She took that as permission and entered, moving slowly so as not to startle him. She sat on the edge of the bed, careful to leave space between them. "I know you can't talk right now," she said. "That's all right. I understand what it's like to lose someone you love. I understand what it's like to wait and wait for someone who's never coming back." Tommy's fingers tightened on the tin soldier, the only sign he'd heard her. "I've been waiting 5 years," Evelyn continued, surprised at herself for speaking this truth aloud. "For a man who promised to come back for me. Everyone says I'm foolish. Everyone says I should give up, but I can't seem to let go of the hope that maybe, somehow, he'll still come." She paused, swallowing past the tightness in her throat. "Your mother loved you very much, didn't she?" A tiny nod. Progress. "Then she'd want you to be brave. She'd want you to keep living, even though she can't be here with you. And that's the hardest thing in the world, isn't it? Keeping on when the person you love is gone." Tommy turned to look at her then, really look at her, and Evelyn saw her own grief reflected in his eyes. They sat in shared silence, two people who understood loss in a way words could never capture. Finally, Evelyn stood. "I'll help find you a good home, Tommy. I promise. You won't be alone." As she reached the doorway, a small voice stopped her. She said heaven was beautiful. Evelyn turned back, her heart clenching. Tommy was still staring at the tin soldier, but tears were running down his cheeks now, silent and steady. "I'm sure it is," Evelyn whispered, "and I'm sure she's watching over you from there, proud of how brave you've been." She left him then, closing the door softly, and stood in the hallway with her hand pressed to her mouth, fighting her own tears. For 5 years she'd been so focused on her own grief, her own waiting, that she'd forgotten there were other kinds of loss, other kinds of pain. This child had watched his mother die. What was her unanswered letters compared to that? Downstairs, she found Caleb sitting on the porch steps, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette and staring at the star-filled sky. He looked up as she emerged, his expression tired but alert. "He spoke to you," Caleb said. Not a question. Somehow, he knew. "A little. Just a few words about his mother." "That's more than he's said in weeks." Caleb took a long drag from his cigarette, exhaled slowly. "You've got a gift with him. He trusts you." "I don't know about that. I understand what he's feeling. The man you're waiting for." It wasn't a question. Somehow he knew that too. Maybe it was obvious in the way she carried herself, or maybe he'd heard the town gossip. "How long has it been?" 5 years? The words felt both too short and too long. "And you still believe he's coming back?" Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark prairie. In the distance, she could just make out the shape of her fence post, the place where she stood every evening, waiting. "I don't know what I believe anymore," she admitted. "I just know I can't seem to stop hoping." Caleb nodded slowly. "Hope's a dangerous thing. It can keep you alive or kill you, depending. You sound like you know from experience. I've lost people too. Loved a woman once, back in Kansas. She died in childbirth, her and the baby both. That was 12 years ago, and I still sometimes wake up reaching for her." He crushed out his cigarette under his boot heel. "The difference is, I know she's gone. You're waiting for someone who might still be alive, might still come back. That's harder, I think, the not knowing." Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. Doesn't make them right. Caleb stood, dusting off his pants. For what it's worth, whoever he was a damn fool to make you wait this long. If I'd had a woman like you promise to wait for me. He shook his head. I'd have moved heaven and earth to get back to her. The words landed in Evelyn's chest like stones, heavy with meaning she wasn't ready to examine. She'd become so used to pity, to judgment, to people treating her like a curiosity or a cautionary tale. But Caleb spoke without any of that. He spoke with simple, straightforward respect. Thank you, she said quietly, for saying that. Just the truth. He tipped his hat to her. Good night, Miss Moore, and thank you again for the meal and the kindness to Tommy. It means more than you know. He walked toward the bunkhouse, his silhouette fading into the darkness, and Evelyn stood alone on the porch, feeling something shift in her chest. Not hope, exactly. Not attraction, but something. A tiny crack in the wall she'd built around her heart, letting in a sliver of light she hadn't even realized she'd been missing. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. Evelyn threw herself into finding a home for Tommy, visiting every family in Clearwater who might be willing to take in an orphan child. She spoke with the Johnsons, who had 3 children already and couldn't manage a 4th. She asked the Wheelers, but they were too old, they said, to start over with a young one. The Reverend and his wife considered it, but ultimately declined. The Reverend's health was poor, and his wife didn't think she could handle the demands of a traumatized child. Each rejection felt personal, though Evelyn knew it wasn't. Frontier life was hard. Everyone was struggling. Taking in an extra mouth to feed, especially a child who needed special care, was asking too much of most families. Meanwhile, Caleb and his men prepared for the final leg of their journey. They repaired worn tack, reshod horses, and rested the cattle in the holding pens. Evelyn saw Caleb around town occasionally, at the blacksmith's, at the general store, always moving with that calm efficiency she found oddly reassuring. He always tipped his hat to her when their paths crossed, always asked if she'd had any luck finding a home for Tommy. She always had to tell him no. On the 3rd evening, with the cattle drive set to leave the next morning, Evelyn stood at her fence post as usual. The letters felt heavier than ever in her hands. Tommy still had no home. Caleb would have to take him on to Cheyenne, and what then? The boy would end up in some orphanage, alone among strangers, his grief unhealed and his voice lost. The injustice of it burned in her throat. This child, who'd already lost so much, deserved better. He deserved, "Mind if I join you?" She turned to find Caleb approaching, leading his horse. The animal's reins dangled loose. Clearly he'd just finished working and had decided to walk rather than ride. In the fading light, she could see the dust on his clothes, the weariness in his shoulders. "It's a free country," she said, then winced at how ungracious that sounded. "I mean, yes, of course." He stood beside her, both of them looking out at the prairie. In the distance, the cattle were dark shapes against the setting sun, and the smell of them, earthy and alive, drifted on the wind. "Beautiful out here," Caleb said after a while. "Lonely, but beautiful. That's Wyoming for you. Is this where you wait? This specific spot?" Evelyn felt her cheeks flush. "You heard about that. Small town. People talk." He glanced at the letters in her hands. "Those from him?" She nodded, unable to speak past the sudden lump in her throat. "May I ask what happened? Or is that too personal?" For some reason, maybe the kindness in his voice, maybe the shared experience of loss, maybe just because she was tired of carrying this alone, Evelyn found herself telling him. She told him about James Albright, about the promises made in dust and desperation, about the letters that had come less and less frequently until they stopped altogether. "The last one came 5 years ago," she finished, "August of 1870. He said there were things he couldn't write about, dangers he couldn't name. He told me to wait for him, so I have." Caleb was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "And if he never comes, if something happened to him out there, then I've wasted 5 years of my life." The words came out bitter. "That's what everyone thinks, anyway." "I don't think that." She turned to look at him, surprised. "You don't?" "No. I think you love someone, and you're honoring that love by keeping your promise. There's nothing foolish about that, nothing crazy. He met her eyes steadily. But I also think, whoever he was, wherever he is, he wouldn't want you to spend your whole life standing at this fence. He'd want you to live. How do you know what he'd want? Because if I'd been lucky enough to have a woman like you love me that way, I'd want her to be happy, even if I couldn't be the one to make her happy. Caleb's expression was serious, no trace of flattery or manipulation, just simple truth. You've been faithful to his memory for 5 years, Miss Moore. That's long enough. You've got a right to your own life now. The words should have made her angry. They should have felt like criticism, like everyone else telling her to give up, move on, let go. But coming from Caleb, they didn't feel like that. They felt like permission she hadn't realized she'd been waiting for. I don't know how to stop, she whispered. The waiting, the hoping, it's become who I am. Without it, I don't know what's left. Someone kind, Caleb said immediately. Someone brave. Someone who makes a lonely little boy feel safe enough to speak for the first time in weeks. Someone who'd spend 3 days knocking on every door in town trying to find him a home, even though you've got your own heartbreak to manage. He paused. That's what's left, Miss Moore. And it's more than enough. Tears blurred Evelyn's vision. She blinked them back, angry at herself for crying, but they came anyway, hot and fast. How long had it been since someone had seen her as something other than the crazy woman at the fence? How long since someone had looked past the waiting and the grief and seen the person she'd been before, the person she might still be? I couldn't find him a home, she said, her voice breaking. Tommy, I tried everyone, and no one will take him. I know, you did your best. It wasn't good enough. Sometimes our best isn't enough. That doesn't mean it wasn't worth doing. Caleb shifted his weight, and his shoulder brushed hers, a warm point of contact in the cooling evening. I'll take good care of him. I promise. Even if he has to come with me to Cheyenne, I'll make sure he ends up somewhere safe. That's not the same as a home. No, Caleb agreed quietly. It's not. They stood in silence as the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, leaving only the afterglow, deep purple bleeding to black, stars emerging one by one like promises. Evelyn felt something loosening in her chest, some tight knot she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Whoever you've been waiting for, Caleb said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, was a fool to leave you standing at this fence. It was almost exactly what he'd said that first night, but this time, hearing it, Evelyn felt it land differently. Not as pity, not as judgment. As simple fact, as truth she'd been denying for 5 years. James Albright had promised to come back. He hadn't. Whatever the reason, death, injury, imprisonment, betrayal, loss of memory, any of 1,000 possibilities, the result was the same. He hadn't come back. And she'd waited long enough. I should get inside, she said, not quite ready to voice what she was feeling. Supper will be ready soon. Of course. Caleb stepped back, giving her space. Thank you for the conversation, Miss Moore. It's been good to talk to someone who understands. Understands what? What it's like to lose something you can never get back. His smile was sad. We're both ghosts in our own way, aren't we? Living in the past instead of the present. The observation cut too close to be comfortable. Evelyn nodded once, then turned and walked back to the farmhouse, leaving Caleb alone by the fence. She didn't look back, but she felt his gaze following her, heavy with something she couldn't name. That night, for the first time in 5 years, Evelyn didn't reread James's letters before going to sleep. She placed them in her dresser drawer, closed it firmly, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Her chest felt strange, lighter somehow, but also empty, as if removing the weight of hope had left a hollow space behind. In the room down the hall, she could hear Tommy moving around, the soft sound of small feet on wooden floors. After a moment's hesitation, Evelyn rose and padded to his door. Tommy, are you all right? Silence, then. Can't sleep. Me neither. She pushed the door open. The boy was sitting on the bed again, clutching his tin soldier, his eyes red from crying. Want some company? A nod. Evelyn sat beside him, and without thinking about it, she put her arm around his thin shoulders. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into her, his small body shaking with silent sobs. "I miss her," he whispered. "I miss her so much. I know, sweetheart. I know." Is it going to stop hurting? The question every grieving person asks, the one no one can answer honestly. Evelyn chose truth over comfort. Not all the way, not ever. But it gets easier to carry. The hurt becomes part of you, and you learn to live with it. You learn to be happy again, even with the hurt still there. How? I don't know yet, Evelyn admitted, but I think it starts with letting other people in, with letting yourself love again, even when you're scared of losing them too. Tommy turned his face into her shoulder and cried properly then, great gasping sobs that shook his whole body. Evelyn held him through it, rocking slowly, murmuring wordless comfort. And as she comforted this grieving child, she felt something crack open wider in her own chest, that sealed-off place she'd been protecting for 5 years, the place where she'd locked away everything except her waiting. The crack hurt. God, it hurt. But it also let in light, let in air, let in the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than standing at a fence and hoping. When Tommy finally cried himself to sleep, Evelyn carried him to bed, tucked him in, and stood watching him for a long moment. Then she returned to her own room, pulled out James's letters one more time, and allowed herself to read them as if for the first time. The handwriting was familiar, the words burned into her memory. But reading them now, 5 years later, she saw something she'd missed before. The promises had been sincere. She believed that. James had meant every word when he wrote them. But intentions didn't guarantee outcomes. Promises couldn't overcome death or disaster or the 100 other catastrophes that befell men on the frontier. James Albright had promised to come back. But he hadn't. And whether he was dead or alive, whether he'd forgotten her or simply couldn't return, the result was the same. She'd kept her promise. She'd waited. She'd been faithful. Now she had to learn how to let go. The next morning, Evelyn woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She dressed quickly, braided her hair, and went downstairs to find her mother already preparing breakfast for their lodgers. "I've made a decision," Evelyn announced without preamble. "About Tommy. If no one else will take him, I will." Catherine's hand stilled on the egg she'd been cracking. "Evie, that's a big responsibility. You're not married. You have no income of your own. I can take in sewing work. I can help more with the lodgers. I can make it work, Ma. I have to make it work. I can't let that child go to some orphanage where no one will understand what he's been through. Your father will say yes, if you ask him." Evelyn met her mother's eyes steadily. "You know he will. You've always wanted grandchildren. This may be your only chance." It was a low blow, but it was also true. Margaret showed no signs of settling down anytime soon, and Evelyn's prospects had died with her long wait. Catherine's expression softened, hope and concern warring in her eyes. "Are you sure? You're talking about raising a child alone, without a husband, without—" "I've spent 5 years waiting for a life to begin," Evelyn interrupted. "Maybe it's time I started living the life I have instead. Tommy needs someone. I need to stop waiting." Her voice cracked. "Please, Ma, let me do this. Let me save one person, even if I couldn't save myself." Catherine set down the egg, wiped her hands on her apron, and pulled Evelyn into a fierce hug. "You've already saved yourself, my darling girl. You just needed time to see it." The relief that flooded through Evelyn nearly knocked her off her feet. She clung to her mother, letting herself be held, letting herself cry the tears she'd been holding back for 5 long years. When the cattle drive prepared to leave at noon, Evelyn was waiting with Tommy. The boy looked confused when she knelt beside him and took his hands. "How would you feel about staying here?" she asked gently. "With me and my family. You'd have your own room and plenty to eat, and you could go to school with the other children in town. You'd have a home, Tommy, a real home." The boy's eyes went wide. "You mean forever?" "If you want it to be forever, then yes." Tommy launched himself at her, wrapping his thin arms around her neck and holding on like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Evelyn held him back just as tightly, feeling the last of the ice around her heart begin to thaw. When she looked up, she found Caleb watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. Relief and gratitude and something deeper. something that made her breath catch. "Thank you," he said simply. "You've given him what I couldn't." "I should be thanking you," Evelyn replied. "You brought him here. You cared enough to try to find him a home instead of just leaving him behind. Still, what you're doing, it's extraordinary." Caleb crouched down to Tommy's level. "You listen to Miss Evelyn, you hear? You be good for her, go to school, help around the house. And you write me letters sometimes. Tell me how you're getting on." Tommy nodded, his grip on Evelyn not loosening. "Will you come back?" "I don't know, son. The trail is long and I go where the work takes me. But I'll think of you, and I'll hope you're happy." Caleb's voice was rough. He straightened, met Evelyn's eyes. "Take care of him." "I will. And take care of yourself, too." He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "I almost didn't give you this. Been carrying it for 3 years trying to decide if I should. But I think you need to know." Evelyn's heart stopped. "What is it?" "Just read it. When you're ready." When he settled. Caleb nodded at Tommy. "And when you do, know that I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I'm sorry." Before she could ask what he meant, Caleb turned and swung up onto his horse. The other cowboys were already mounted, the cattle stirring restlessly in their pens. Within minutes, the drive was moving out, a river of cattle and dust flowing north toward Cheyenne. Evelyn stood with Tommy in her arms, one hand clutching the envelope Caleb had given her, watching the man who'd somehow changed her life in 3 short days ride away. She waited until he was just a speck on the horizon, then she looked down at the envelope. Her name was written on the front in handwriting she didn't recognize. The paper was worn, water-stained, obviously old. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and pulled out a single page. And as she read, the world tilted sideways, everything she'd believed for 5 years crashing down around her, like walls made of paper. But Miss Evelyn Moore, Wyoming Territory. "My name is Caleb Ross. You don't know me, but I knew Captain James Albright. I was with him at the end, and he asked me to find you if I could, to tell you what happened. James died in Colorado Territory in the fall of 1873. We'd mustered out of the cavalry together, decided to try our hand at prospecting in the mountains outside Denver. We found some silver, enough to make dreams of the future feel real. James talked about you constantly, about the ranch he'd buy, the house he'd build, the life you'd have together. Then the mine collapsed. I got out. James didn't. I dug for 3 days trying to reach him, but the whole mountain came down. There was no recovering his body, no proper burial, just rock and darkness and the dream of a future that died with him. I've carried this letter for 3 years, trying to work up the courage to deliver it. Kept telling myself I'd find you eventually, kept making excuses for why today wasn't the day. Truth is, I'm a coward. I didn't want to be the one to destroy your hope. But you deserve the truth, Miss Moore. Captain Albright loved you truly. Every promise he made was real. He died trying to build a life worthy of you. His last words were your name. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I'm sorry I've let you wait this long not knowing. And I'm sorry that this letter is all I can give you. The truth, finally, though it comes far too late. If I ever have the chance, if fate ever brings me to Wyoming Territory, I'll deliver this in person. But in case I don't, in case I'm too much a coward to face you, I'm leaving this with the postmaster in Denver with instructions to send it on. He loved you. Please know that, whatever else you believe. He loved you, and he's gone, and you deserve better than to spend your life waiting for a dead man. Respectfully, Caleb Ross. September 1876. The letter slipped from Evelyn's fingers and drifted to the ground. Her vision blurred. Her knees went weak. Tommy was saying something, his voice high with concern, but she couldn't hear him over the roaring in her ears. James was dead. Had been dead for 5 years. All this time, all her waiting, all her hoping, it had been for nothing, for a ghost, for a man who died under a mountain in Colorado, trying to build a future they would never have. And Caleb had known. For 3 years he'd known, and he'd said nothing. He'd stood beside her at the fence, talked to her about letting go, treated her with kindness and respect, all while carrying the truth that would destroy her. Evelyn sank to the ground, Tommy's arms around her, the little boy trying to comfort her the way she'd comforted him. She pressed her face against his shoulder and cried. For James, for herself, for 5 years lost to waiting, for the life she'd imagined that would never be. But even through the grief, even through the shock, she felt something else, something unexpected. Relief. The not knowing had been torture, the endless hoping, the constant wondering, the voice in her head that whispered, maybe tomorrow, maybe tomorrow. It had been slowly destroying her. Now she knew. The wait was over, James was gone, truly and finally gone, and she could mourn him properly and then, eventually, let him go. Miss Evelyn? Tommy's voice was small and scared. Are you okay? She pulled back, wiping her eyes, trying to smile for this child who'd already seen too much grief. I will be, sweetheart. I will be. That night, Evelyn stood at her fence post one last time. She had the letter from Caleb in one hand and James's 23 letters in the other. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and deep purple. It was beautiful. It had always been beautiful. She'd just been too focused on watching for someone who would never come to notice. I'm letting you go, she whispered to the wind, to the prairie, to the memory of James Albright. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry I didn't know, but I'm letting you go now. I hope you're at peace, wherever you are. She considered burning the letters, making some dramatic gesture of closure, but that felt wrong, disrespectful to what they'd had. Instead, she tied them with their faded ribbon one last time and took them inside. She'd keep them, these relics of a lost love, but she wouldn't read them anymore. Wouldn't stand at the fence waiting, wouldn't let the past consume her future. Tommy was waiting for her in the kitchen, looking anxious. Evelyn forced herself to smile and held out her hand. Want to help me make cookies? I think we both could use something sweet. His face lit up, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Really? Really? Come on, let's see what we can make. As they worked together, measuring flour and sugar, cracking eggs and stirring batter, Evelyn felt the first stirrings of something that might eventually become happiness. She'd spent 5 years waiting for her life to begin. Now, finally, it was beginning, not in the way she'd imagined, not with the man she'd loved, but beginning nonetheless. She had a child to raise, work to do, a purpose beyond waiting. It wasn't the future she'd dreamed of, but it was real, and it was hers, and it was enough. Outside, the fence post stood empty, no longer a shrine to lost hope, but just a fence post, ordinary and unremarkable. The wind blew across the prairie, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain, and for the first time in 5 years, Evelyn didn't feel like a ghost. She felt alive. The weeks that followed felt like learning to walk after years of being paralyzed. Every morning, Evelyn woke with a strange lightness in her chest, the absence of that crushing weight she'd carried for so long. The grief was still there, sharp and real when she let herself feel it, but it was different now. It was the clean pain of a wound that could finally begin healing, not the festering ache of uncertainty that had poisoned everything. Tommy became her anchor to the present. The boy needed routine, needed safety, needed someone to show him that the world could still be trusted even after it had taken everything from him. So Evelyn created structure where there had been none. Breakfast at 7, lessons at the kitchen table until noon, chores in the afternoon, supper at 6, bedtime stories by lamplight. Simple rhythms that gave shape to their days. The town of Clearwater watched this transformation with mixed reactions. Some of the women, the kinder ones like Martha Henderson and Sarah Bishop, brought by casseroles and offers of help, understanding without being told that Evelyn was rebuilding herself piece by piece. Others, like Prudence Whitmore and her circle of gossips, clucked their tongues and whispered about the impropriety of an unmarried woman raising a boy child, never mind that the alternative was sending him to an orphanage where he'd likely die of neglect or despair. Let them talk, Catherine said one afternoon when Evelyn came home from the mercantile with tight shoulders and red-rimmed eyes from holding back tears at the whispers that had followed her through the aisles. You're doing a good thing, Evie. Don't let small minds make you doubt that. But doubt crept in anyway, especially in the quiet moments. Was she doing right by Tommy? Could she really give him what he needed? She had no husband to provide for them, no experience with children, nothing but determination and a fierce need to save this one small life since she hadn't been able to save her own from 5 years of wasted waiting. Tommy, for his part, attached himself to her with an intensity that was both touching and terrifying. He followed her from room to room, panic flashing in his eyes whenever she left his sight for more than a few minutes. At night, he woke screaming from nightmares, calling for his mother in a voice that broke Evelyn's heart over and over. She'd rush to his room, hold him while he sobbed, rock him back to sleep with lullabies she half remembered from her own childhood. "It'll get easier," Margaret said one morning after a particularly bad night had left both Evelyn and Tommy exhausted and hollow-eyed. "He just needs time." "I know." Evelyn poured coffee with shaking hands, splashing some on the counter. "I just wish I knew how much time. I wish there was a schedule for grief, a timeline I could follow. 3 months until the nightmares stop. 6 months until he can smile without it looking like it hurts. A year until he's whole again." "That's not how it works, though." "No." Evelyn wiped up the spilled coffee, her movements mechanical. "It's not." May slipped into June, and Wyoming transformed from brown and gray to a riot of wildflowers and green grass. The world kept turning, indifferent to human suffering, beautiful in a way that felt almost insulting. Evelyn found herself resenting the sunshine, the blue skies, the way everything bloomed and grew while she still felt like winter inside. But Tommy was slowly, incrementally improving. The nightmares came less frequently. He started eating with something approaching appetite instead of just mechanical necessity. He even laughed once, a surprised burst of sound when Margaret Suter, a young rancher named David Klein, told a silly joke about a chicken and a fence post. The laughter died quickly, guilt washing over Tommy's face like he'd committed some betrayal of his mother's memory, but Evelyn had heard it and taken hope from it. "You're allowed to be happy," she told him that night as she tucked him in. "Your mother would want you to be happy. Joy isn't betrayal, Tommy. It's survival." "Do you think she can see me?" The question was small, tentative. "From heaven?" "I think love doesn't end just because someone dies. I think the people who loved us stay with us in all the ways that matter." Evelyn smoothed his hair back from his forehead, the gesture becoming familiar, almost natural. "So yes, I think she sees you, and I think she's glad you're safe and cared for." "I wish you could have met her. You would have liked her." "I'm sure I would have." Evelyn's throat tightened. She must have been very special to have raised such a brave boy. Tommy's eyes drifted closed, exhaustion finally claiming him. Evelyn sat beside his bed until his breathing deepened and steadied, then crept out into the hallway where she allowed herself a moment of weakness, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor with her head in her hands. She was so tired. Bone-deep, soul-deep tired in a way that sleep couldn't touch. The responsibility of keeping Tommy safe, of helping him heal, of being strong when she still felt broken herself, it was crushing. And beneath it all, threading through everything else, was the grief for James that she'd finally allowed herself to feel. Not the fantasy of James she'd been waiting for, but the real man who'd died under a mountain trying to build them a future. The man she'd loved and lost and never properly mourned because she hadn't known he was gone. "Evie?" She looked up to find her father standing in the dimly lit hallway, his lined face soft with concern. Robert Moore wasn't a demonstrative man. Frontier life had taught him to keep emotions practical and expressions of affection rare. But he sat down beside her now, his solid presence a comfort. "You're doing a good job with the boy," he said quietly. "I don't feel like I am. I feel like I'm drowning, and I'm trying to keep him afloat, and we're both going under." That's what being a parent feels like most of the time. The difference is, you chose this. You didn't have to take him in, but you did. That takes courage. Evelyn let her head fall onto her father's shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was a child herself. "I read the letter, Papa. The one the cowboy gave me. James is dead. He's been dead for 5 years, and I've been waiting for a ghost." "I know. Your mother told me." "Why didn't you make me stop? Why didn't you force me to see reason, to move on, to stop wasting my life standing at that fence?" Robert was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because hope was all you had, Evie. Taking that away before you were ready would have destroyed you. Sometimes people need to hold on to things, even impossible things, until they're strong enough to let go. He squeezed her shoulder. You let go when you were ready. That's all that matters now. They sat in silence until Evelyn's breathing steadied and the tightness in her chest eased slightly. Then Robert stood, offered her his hand, and pulled her to her feet. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow will be easier. It was a lie, and they both knew it, but sometimes lies were kinder than truth. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Evelyn was in the garden, teaching Tommy how to tell the difference between vegetable seedlings and weeds, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She shaded her eyes against the sun and saw a lone rider coming up the road. A woman, she realized as the figure drew closer, riding astride in men's trousers with a rifle slung across her back. The rider pulled up at the fence, swung down from her horse with practiced ease, and removed her hat to reveal iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked to be in her 50s, weathered and tough, with eyes that assessed everything in a single sweeping glance. "You Evelyn Moore?" the woman called out. "I am." Evelyn stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, instinctively moving Tommy behind her. Strangers on the frontier were cause for caution, especially strange women who rode alone and armed. "Can I help you?" "Name's Ruth Callahan. I run a ranch about 15 miles west of here. Heard you took in one of the orphans from that cattle drive back in April." "I did." Evelyn's hand found Tommy's shoulder, protective. "Is there a problem?" "Problem? No. Opposite, actually." Ruth's weathered face softened slightly. "I've got 3 orphans of my own, trail kids whose parents died heading west. Been raising them alone since my husband passed 2 years back. It's hard work, lonesome work, and I thought maybe you and I could help each other out." Evelyn blinked, surprised. "Help each other how?" "Share knowledge, mostly. I've got experience with traumatized children, but I'm not much for book learning or teaching social graces. You strike me as the educated type. Maybe we could trade off. I teach you survival skills, you teach my kids their letters, and the young ones could play together, help each other heal." Ruth shifted her weight, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "I'm not good with words, Miss Moore. What I'm trying to say is raising orphans alone is damn hard. Thought maybe we could be less alone together." The offer was so unexpected, so practical and unsentimental, that Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. She'd been so focused on managing alone, on proving she could handle this responsibility, that it hadn't occurred to her to look for help from someone who understood. "I think that would be wonderful," Evelyn said, her voice thick. "When would you like to start?" "Now's as good a time as any. Got the wagon coming behind me with the kids. Figured we could all have lunch together. Let the young ones get acquainted." Ruth's stern expression cracked into something approaching a smile. "Fair warning, though, my 3 are wild as coyotes. Your boy might find them overwhelming." But Tommy was peering around Evelyn with unmistakable curiosity, the first real interest in anything outside his grief that she'd seen. "How old are they?" he asked, his voice still soft but gaining strength. "Benjamin's 10, Sarah's 8, and little Miguel's just turned 6. Ben's from Kansas, Sarah from Nebraska. Miguel from a Mexican family trying to reach California, all orphaned on the trail, all needing a home." Ruth's eyes softened as she looked at Tommy. "All needing other kids who understand what it's like to lose everything." Within the hour, Ruth's wagon arrived carrying 3 children who were exactly as advertised, loud, energetic, and completely unintimidated by strangers. Benjamin had red hair and freckles and an endless stream of chatter. Sarah was quieter but fierce, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Little Miguel spoke mostly Spanish, with enough English mixed in to make himself understood, and possessed an infectious laugh that seemed impossible given what he'd been through. Evelyn watched Tommy transform in their presence. The other children didn't treat him like he was fragile or broken. They just absorbed him into their games, into their noise and chaos, with the easy acceptance of the young. By the time Catherine called them all in for lunch, Tommy was actually running, actually playing, in a way Evelyn hadn't seen since Caleb first brought him to the farm. "You've got a gift," Ruth said quietly, as they watched the 4 children from the porch. "Not everyone can see past their own pain long enough to help someone else." "I'm not sure it's a gift. More like recognizing a fellow sufferer." Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the summer warmth. I spent 5 years suffering too. Different kind of pain, but suffering all the same. Ruth's sharp eyes studied her. The cowboy thing. I heard about that. The one you were waiting for. Of course she'd heard. Everyone had heard. Evelyn's humiliation was public knowledge. Her 5 years of delusion, something people would discuss for years to come. Remember Evelyn Moore, who waited for a dead man? Remember how crazy she went? He died, Evelyn said flatly. In 1873, in Colorado. I didn't know. I kept waiting for someone who was already gone. That's not crazy. That's tragedy. Ruth's tone was matter-of-fact, no pity in it. Crazy would be waiting even after you knew he was dead. You just didn't have the information you needed to grieve properly. Nothing shameful about that. The words loosened something in Evelyn's chest. She'd been bracing for judgment, for the knowing looks and whispered criticisms that followed her everywhere in town. But Ruth just stated facts, offered perspective, then moved on as if Evelyn's past was no more interesting than anyone else's. They spent the afternoon together, the women talking while the children played. Ruth told stories about her late husband, a gentle giant of a man who'd been killed when his horse threw him into a ravine. She talked about the early days of taking in orphans, the mistakes she'd made, the lessons she'd learned the hard way. The nightmares are the worst, Ruth admitted. Benjamin still wakes up screaming, and it's been 2 years. Sarah won't talk about what happened to her parents. I think it was violent, but she won't say. Miguel cries for his mama in his sleep. Breaks your heart to hear it. Tommy does the same, Evelyn said quietly. And he follows me everywhere. Gets panicked if I'm out of sight for more than a few minutes. That'll ease, given time. They need to learn the world can be trusted again. You can be trusted again. Ruth poured them both more coffee from the pot Catherine had left on the porch. It helps when they have other children around. Helps them remember how to be children instead of just survivors. Watching Tommy laugh at something Benjamin said, actually laugh with his whole body in a way that looked almost painful in its joy, Evelyn felt a surge of gratitude so intense it made her dizzy. She'd been so focused on what she'd lost, 5 years of her life, the future she'd imagined, the man she'd loved, that she hadn't noticed what she was gaining. Purpose, connection, the chance to help someone heal, which was somehow helping her heal too. When Ruth and the children finally left, with promises to visit again the following week and bring books for a makeshift school, Tommy was exhausted but glowing. Can they come back soon? He asked as they watched the wagon disappear down the road. Can I go to their ranch sometime? Of course. Ruth and I are going to help each other, which means you'll see them often. Evelyn smoothed his hair, the gesture automatic now. Did you have fun? Yeah. Tommy leaned against her side, a rare moment of physical affection that made her throat tight. Benjamin said it's okay to miss my mama. He said he misses his parents every day, but it hurts less now. Do you think that'll happen for me too? I know it will. Grief doesn't go away, but it changes. It becomes something you can carry instead of something that crushes you. Is that what happened with your cowboy? The one you were waiting for? Evelyn stiffened, surprised. She hadn't realized Tommy knew about that. But of course he did. Children heard everything, understood more than adults gave them credit for. Yes, she said after a moment. I was waiting for someone who died. I didn't know he was gone, so I kept hoping he'd come back. It hurt for a long time. It still hurts. But now I know the truth, so I can start to heal. Do you think my mama knew she was going to die? Do you think she was scared? The question gutted her. Evelyn knelt down so she was eye level with Tommy, taking his small face in her hands. I think your mama loved you more than anything in the world. I think if she was scared, it was only because she worried about leaving you alone. And I think if she could see you now, see how brave you've been, how hard you're trying, she'd be so proud. Tommy's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't look away. I'm glad you found me. I'm glad I'm here with you. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. That night, for the first time since coming to the Moore farm, Tommy fell asleep without nightmares. Evelyn sat in the rocking chair in his room, watching him sleep, marveling at the resilience of children. He was healing, faster than she would have thought possible, finding his way back to joy and childhood one day at a time. She wished she could do the same, but adult grief was different, more complicated, tangled up with regret and shame and questions that had no answers. She'd loved James truly, but had she really known him? They'd had 3 months together, most of it spent in the heightened emotion of wartime romance. Who would they have become after years of marriage, of ordinary life? Would their love have lasted, or would it have faded once the desperate urgency was gone? She'd never know. That was the hardest part, not just grieving what she'd lost, but grieving what she'd never had the chance to build. All those years of waiting, she'd been in love with a memory, with a promise, with the idea of James more than the reality of him. Now she had to mourn both the real man and the fantasies she'd constructed, and she wasn't sure which loss hurt more. A soft knock on the doorframe made her look up. Margaret stood in the hallway holding a lamp, her expression tentative. "Can I come in?" Evelyn nodded, and her sister entered, sitting on the edge of Tommy's bed with careful quiet. "You're good with him," Margaret whispered. "I didn't think you would be, honestly. You've been so distant for so long, I worried you'd forgotten how to connect with people." "I had forgotten. He's teaching me to remember." "Do you regret it? Taking him in? I know it's been hard." Evelyn looked at Tommy's sleeping face, peaceful in the lamplight. "Not for a second. He needed me. I needed to be needed. We're saving each other, I think." Margaret was quiet for a moment, then said, "The cowboy who brought him, Mr. Ross, did you know he came back?" Evelyn's heart lurched. "What?" "2 weeks ago, he stopped by the mercantile asking after you, asking how Tommy was doing. Mr. Henderson told him you'd taken the boy in. He seemed, I don't know, relieved maybe, or surprised. He didn't stay long, rode out the same day." Margaret studied her sister's face. "I thought you'd want to know." "He came back." Evelyn's mind raced. Caleb had been here, had asked about them, and hadn't come to the farm. Why? Was he ashamed of waiting 3 years to deliver the truth about James? Did he think she'd blame him for her wasted waiting? The anger she'd felt when she first read his letter had faded. How could she blame him for struggling with an impossible burden? He hadn't known her, had owed her nothing, yet he'd carried that letter for 3 years trying to work up the courage to destroy her hope. That wasn't cruelty. That was painful compassion from someone who understood grief too well. "Did he say where he was going?" Evelyn asked. "North," Mr. Henderson thought. "Another cattle drive, maybe, or ranch work. You know how these cowboys are. They drift where the work takes them." Margaret tilted her head. "Why? Does it matter?" "I don't know." Evelyn touched the locket at her throat. Inside was a small photograph of James in his cavalry uniform, the only image she had of him. Soon she'd take it out, put it away, stop wearing his memory against her heart. But not yet. "I think I'd like to thank him. For telling me the truth, even though it hurt. For bringing Tommy to us. For seeing me as more than just the crazy woman at the fence." Margaret smiled. "He saw you clearly then. The rest of us have been seeing you clearly all along, Evie. You're the one who couldn't see past your waiting." After Margaret left, Evelyn sat in the darkness, thinking about Caleb Ross. She remembered the quiet strength in him, the way he'd stood beside her at the fence without judgment, the kindness in his voice when he told her she deserved to live. She remembered his eyes, sad and knowing, the eyes of someone who'd lost pieces of himself and learned to keep going anyway. He'd come back. He'd checked on them and then left without a word. Something about that felt significant, though Evelyn couldn't quite name why. Maybe he hadn't wanted to intrude on her grief. Maybe he'd been afraid of her anger. Or maybe, and this thought made her breath catch, maybe he'd felt something during those 3 days in April, something he hadn't wanted to pursue while she was still trapped in waiting. It didn't matter. He was gone, off to whatever work called him next, and she was here with Tommy and her family and the hard work of learning to live again. That was enough. It had to be enough. July arrived with scorching heat that turned the prairie brown and made even breathing feel like work. Tommy turned 9, and they celebrated with a cake and a small party that included Ruth's children. Benjamin gave him a hand-carved wooden horse. Sarah made him a bookmark from pressed flowers. Miguel drew him a picture of a cowboy on a horse that looked more like a dog. But Tommy declared it was the best gift ever and hung it on his bedroom wall. "Make a wish," Evelyn said as Tommy prepared to blow out the candles. He closed his eyes tight, his face scrunched with concentration, then blew hard enough to extinguish all 9 flames. Everyone cheered. When Evelyn cut the cake, she found Tommy watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What did you wish for?" she asked quietly. "Can't tell. It won't come true if I tell." "That's the rule." She handed him the first piece, the biggest corner piece with the most frosting. "But sometimes wishes come true whether you tell them or not." That night, after the guests had gone and Tommy was asleep, Evelyn found the bundle of James's letters in her dresser drawer. She hadn't looked at them since the day she'd learned he was dead, had locked them away like relics of a past life. Now she pulled them out, untied the faded ribbon, and read through them one last time. The words were still beautiful, still full of love and promise. But reading them now, with grief that had finally begun to heal, she could see what she'd missed before. The desperation beneath the devotion, the fear James had hidden behind optimism, the sense that he was trying to convince himself as much as her that they'd have their future together. He'd known, she realized. On some level, he'd known he might not survive. That's why the last letter had warned her, had told her he loved her in case anything happened. He'd been saying goodbye even as he asked her to keep waiting. "I forgive you," she whispered to the memory of him, to the ghost she'd finally laid to rest. "I forgive you for dying. I forgive you for not coming back. And I forgive myself for waiting so long." Then she carried the letters downstairs to the kitchen stove. The fire had burned down to coals, but it was enough. She fed the letters into the heat one at a time, watching the paper curl and blacken, watching 5 years of hope and heartbreak transform into ash. It hurt, that final letting go, but it also felt like release, like opening a cage she'd been trapped in and stepping out into painful, beautiful freedom. The last letter, the one from Caleb, the one that had finally told her the truth, she kept. She folded it carefully and placed it in her Bible, not as a relic, but as a reminder. A reminder that truth, however painful, was better than comfortable lies. That sometimes kindness wore harsh faces. That endings were also beginnings, if you were brave enough to see them that way. August brought a letter from Ruth Callahan. Evelyn recognized the handwriting, blocky and practical, like the woman herself. She opened it at the kitchen table while Tommy practiced his sums nearby. "Evelyn, I'm writing to tell you about a harvest festival the neighboring ranches are organizing for the first Saturday in September. Music, food, games for the children. I think it would be good for Tommy to attend, to be around people in a context that's purely joyful. God knows these kids need joy. Also, there's a man I want you to meet. His name is William Garrett. He runs the ranch adjacent to mine. Lost his wife in childbirth 3 years ago, has been raising his daughter alone. He's a good man, steady and kind, and I think you two might get along. Before you get your back up about matchmaking, I'm not trying to marry you off. I just think you both could use friends who understand what it's like to raise children alone while grieving someone else. Sometimes friendship is enough. Think about coming. The kids would love it." Ruth Evelyn read the letter twice, emotions swirling. Part of her recoiled at the idea of being match-made like some commodity at auction. But Ruth had specifically said she wasn't trying to arrange a marriage, just a friendship. And God knew Evelyn could use friends, real friends, not the pitying acquaintances she had in Clearwater. "What's the letter say?" Tommy asked, looking up from his arithmetic. "Mrs. Callahan is inviting us to a festival. There'll be music and games. Would you like to go?" Tommy's face lit up with the enthusiasm that was becoming more common, more natural. "Can Benjamin and Sarah and Miguel be there?" "I'm sure they will be. That's the whole point." "Then yes. Can we go, please?" Looking at his eager face, at the hope shining in his eyes, Evelyn couldn't have refused even if she'd wanted to. This was what healing looked like. A child excited about a party, about seeing friends, about something as simple and ordinary as a harvest festival. "We'll go," she promised. "We'll both go." The weeks leading up to the festival were busy ones. Catherine helped Evelyn sew a new dress. Nothing fancy, just a simple cotton print in deep blue that made her eyes look more green than gray. Margaret insisted on doing Evelyn's hair in a style that was fashionable without being fussy, weaving in small flowers from the garden. "You look pretty," Tommy said with the brutal honesty of children when he saw her ready to leave for the festival. "You should wear flowers in your hair more often." "Maybe I will," Evelyn said, surprised to find she meant it. When had she stopped caring about her appearance? Sometime during the long years of waiting, vanity had seemed pointless when there was no one to see her, no one to care. But now, looking at herself in the mirror, she saw a woman instead of a ghost. Thin, yes, and marked by grief, but alive, present, here. The festival was held at a large ranch about an hour's ride from Clearwater. By the time the Moore family arrived, the place was already crowded with ranching families from the surrounding area. Long tables groaned under the weight of food, roasted meat, fresh bread, pies and cakes, vegetables from the last of the summer harvest. Musicians tuned their instruments on a makeshift stage. Children ran everywhere, screaming with the pure joy of being young and free. Tommy spotted Benjamin and the others immediately and took off running, not even waiting for Evelyn's permission. She watched him go with a mixture of pride and melancholy. He was healing so fast, moving forward while she still felt stuck sometimes, caught between past and future. "There you are!" Ruth appeared at her elbow, her weathered face creased in a smile. "I was starting to think you'd chickened out." "Almost did," Evelyn admitted. "Crowds still make me nervous." "They make everyone nervous. We're just better at hiding it." Ruth linked her arm through Evelyn's with casual familiarity. "Come on, there's someone I want you to meet." She led Evelyn through the crowd to where a tall man stood watching the musicians set up. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with brown hair going gray at the temples and a face that was handsome in a weathered, outdoorsy way. A little girl of about 5 clung to his hand, eyeing the other children with obvious longing but making no move to join them. "William!" Ruth called, and the man turned. "This is Evelyn Moore, the woman I told you about." Evelyn, William Garrett, and his daughter Emma. William's handshake was firm, his eyes direct. "Ruth speaks highly of you, says you've taken in one of the trail orphans." "I have. His name is Tommy. He's around here somewhere causing trouble with Ruth's brood." A smile flickered across William's face. "Emma's too shy to cause trouble. I keep telling her it's okay to play with other children, but she's cautious. Can't blame her for that. The world teaches caution early out here." They fell into easy conversation, the kind of talk between people who understood hardship without needing to dwell on it. William told her about his ranch, about the challenges of raising a daughter alone. Evelyn talked about Tommy, about the unexpected joys and terrors of suddenly becoming a mother to a grieving child. They compared notes on nightmares and difficult meals and the million small ways they were both trying to provide stability in an unstable world. "Ruth said you lost your husband a few years back?" Evelyn asked. "Wife, Rebecca. She died bringing Emma into the world." William's expression tightened. "I loved her, but I barely knew her. We'd only been married 6 months when she got pregnant. Sometimes I feel like I'm mourning a stranger." The honesty of it startled Evelyn. Most people hid their complicated grief behind socially acceptable narratives. But William spoke truth, that you could grieve someone deeply even if you hadn't known them long, that loss didn't require years of shared history to be valid. "I understand that," she found herself saying. "I waited 5 years for a man I'd only known 3 months. When I found out he was dead, I grieved for him, but I also grieved for the life I'd imagined, which was maybe never real to begin with." "Ruth mentioned you'd been waiting for someone. I hope you don't think I'm prying." "I don't." And surprisingly, she didn't. There was something about William's straightforward manner that made honesty feel safe instead of vulnerable. "I spent too long living in the past. I'm trying to learn how to live in the present now." "That's the trick, isn't it?" William looked at his daughter, who was finally edging toward the other children, drawn by their laughter. "Moving forward while carrying what's behind us. Some days I manage it. Other days I feel like I'm just going through motions, pretending I know what I'm doing." "Welcome to parenthood," Evelyn said dryly, and William laughed, a surprised, genuine sound that made her smile in response. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, not as potential courtship, but as two people who recognized each other's struggle. When the dancing started, William asked her for one dance, proper and respectful, and Evelyn accepted. It felt strange being in a man's arms again, moving to music after so long. But it also felt normal, easy, like something she'd forgotten she knew how to do. "Thank you," William said when the song ended, "for the dance and the conversation both. It's been a long time since I've talked to someone who understood without needing lengthy explanations." "Likewise." Evelyn spotted Tommy watching her from across the dance floor, his expression curious. I should check on my boy. And I should rescue Emma before she gets overwhelmed. William tipped his hat. Perhaps we'll see each other again. Ruth's organizing some kind of cooperative school for the local children. I think Emma would benefit from having structured learning with other kids. Tommy would too. We'll be there. As she walked toward Tommy, Evelyn felt lighter than she had in months. She'd made a friend, a real friend, not someone who pitied her or judged her or wanted something from her, just another person trying to survive and raise a child and find moments of joy in between the hardship. Who was that? Tommy asked when she reached him, his tone suspicious in the way of children who don't want to share their parents' attention. A friend of Mrs. Callahan's. His name is Mr. Garrett, and he has a daughter your age. Are you going to marry him? The question was so unexpected that Evelyn laughed. What? No, we just met, Tommy. We were talking, that's all. Okay, good. Tommy grabbed her hand. Come see what Benjamin built. It's a fort made of hay bales, and we're going to defend it against the grown-ups. She let him pull her away, back into the simple world of childhood games where the only battles were pretend and the only losses were temporary. But as she helped the children defend their hay fort against the mock attacks of adults, she found herself glancing occasionally toward where William stood with his daughter and thinking that maybe someday she could imagine a future that included more than just her and Tommy. Not yet. The grief was too fresh, the wound still healing. But someday. The possibility existed now, whereas before it hadn't. Before, there had only been waiting, only the fence and the letters and the ghost of James Albright. Now there was this, life continuing, connections forming, hope cautiously rebuilding itself from ashes. The sun set over the prairie in bands of orange and gold, and the musicians played while people danced and children ran wild, and Evelyn stood in the midst of it all, feeling present, feeling alive, feeling for the first time in 5 years like maybe she had a future worth living. On the ride home, Tommy fell asleep against her shoulder, worn out from playing. Catherine and Margaret chattered about the people they'd seen, the gossip they'd heard. Robert drove the wagon in comfortable silence, occasionally pointing out constellations in the vast Wyoming sky. And Evelyn thought about Caleb Ross, about the man who'd brought Tommy to her, who'd told her the truth about James, who'd seen her as more than just a woman waiting at a fence. She wondered where he was now, what cattle drives he was leading, what dusty trails he was following. She wondered if he ever thought about those 3 days in Clearwater, if he'd carried any weight away with him the way she'd carried the weight of his truth. She hoped he was well. She hoped he'd found some peace, some relief from whatever grief haunted his own eyes. And she hoped that somehow, if their paths ever crossed again, she'd be able to thank him properly for the gift he'd given her. Not the easy gift of comfort, but the hard gift of truth that had finally set her free. The wagon rolled through the darkness toward home, and Evelyn held Tommy close, feeling his steady breathing, feeling the weight of him warm and real and present. This was her life now. Not the one she'd dreamed of, not the future she'd spent 5 years waiting for, but something real and immediate and hers. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. September arrived with cool mornings and the golden light that marked summer's end. The cooperative school Ruth had organized met 3 times a week in a converted barn on her property, with various parents taking turns teaching different subjects. Evelyn found herself instructing reading and writing, discovering she had a patience for education she'd never known existed. Tommy thrived in the structure, his reading improving rapidly, his confidence growing with each small success. William Garrett proved to be as steady and reliable as Ruth had promised. He taught the children mathematics and basic sciences, explaining complex concepts with a clarity that made even the youngest students understand. His daughter Emma slowly emerged from her shell, forming a particular attachment to Tommy, who treated her with a gentle protectiveness that made Evelyn's heart ache with pride. "You're raising him well," William commented one afternoon as they watched Tommy help Emma sound out a difficult word. "He's kind without being told to be. That's rare." "He learned kindness from suffering," Evelyn replied quietly. "He knows what it feels like to be lost and scared, so he recognizes it in others. Still, many people survive trauma and become hard. He's becoming stronger instead. William paused, then added carefully, "You should be proud of what you've built together." The words settled warm in her chest. She was proud, she realized. For the first time in years, she felt like she was doing something meaningful, something that mattered beyond her own grief and waiting. Tommy was healing, and in helping him heal, she was healing too. October brought the first frost and preparations for winter. The Moore farm needed repairs. The barn roof had weak spots that wouldn't survive heavy snow. The chicken coop needed reinforcing against predators. Firewood had to be split and stacked. Robert was aging, his joints stiff with arthritis, unable to manage the heavy labor alone. Evelyn found herself struggling with tasks that required strength she didn't have, frustration mounting as winter approached and the work piled up. "You need help," Margaret said bluntly one morning after Evelyn had spent 2 hours trying to patch the barn roof and nearly fallen twice. "Papa can't do it. Tommy's too young, and you're going to break your neck trying to do everything yourself. We can't afford to hire help. You know the harvest was poor again this year." "Then ask for help. William Garrett would probably—" "No." Evelyn's response was sharp, immediate. "I'm not asking William for help. He'll think I'm angling for something more than friendship. Would that be so terrible? He's a good man, Evie. He clearly likes you, and Emma and Tommy get along so well. I'm not ready." The words came out harsh, defensive. "I may never be ready. Just because I've stopped waiting for James doesn't mean I'm prepared to start something new." Margaret's expression softened. "I'm not saying you need to marry him tomorrow. I'm just saying you don't have to do everything alone. None of us do." But pride and fear kept Evelyn stubbornly independent, refusing help even when she desperately needed it. She exhausted herself trying to manage tasks meant for men, fell into bed each night with muscles screaming and hands blistered, woke before dawn to start again. Tommy watched with worried eyes but said nothing, understanding somehow that his guardian was fighting battles that had nothing to do with barn roofs or chicken coops. The first snow came early that year in mid-October, catching everyone unprepared. Evelyn was in town buying supplies when the storm hit, heavy wet flakes that turned the world white in minutes. She hurried to finish her shopping, anxious to get home before the roads became impassable, when she heard a commotion outside the mercantile. "Cattle drive coming through," someone called. "Big one, heading south before the pass closes for winter." Evelyn's heart stuttered. Cattle drive. It could be any outfit, any trail boss, any group of cowboys pushing livestock before the weather turned deadly. But something made her step outside, made her stand on the mercantile porch watching as the herd approached through the swirling snow. And there he was. Caleb Ross rode at the head of the column, sitting his horse with that same quiet authority she remembered. 5 months had passed since April, since he'd brought Tommy to them, since he'd handed her that letter that had shattered and freed her in equal measure. 5 months. And she'd wondered if she'd ever see him again. He hadn't spotted her yet. His attention focused on managing the herd through the unexpected storm. Evelyn watched him work, saw the economy of his movements, the way the other cowboys deferred to his silent commands. He looked thinner than she remembered, more weathered, exhaustion etched deep in the lines around his eyes. The herd moved past slowly, headed for the holding pens at the edge of town. Caleb rode with them, and Evelyn thought he would pass without seeing her. But at the last moment, he turned his head, and their eyes met across the swirling snow. Recognition flashed in his face, followed by something she couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or apprehension, or something deeper that made her pulse quicken. He reined his horse to a stop, the animal dancing nervously beneath him, then tipped his hat with that same respectful gesture she remembered. "Miss Moore? Mr. Ross?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Welcome back to Clearwater." He dismounted, handed his reins to another cowboy with a murmured instruction, then approached the porch. Up close, she could see the toll the months had taken. New scars on his hands, shadows under his eyes, a hollowness to his cheeks that spoke of too little food and too much hard work. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said quietly. "Thought you'd be at the farm." "I came for supplies. The snow caught me by surprise." "It caught all of us by surprise. We're going to have to shelter here a few days, wait for it to pass before we can push on." He glanced toward the holding pens, then back at her. "How's Tommy? Is he all right?" The concern in his voice was genuine, unguarded. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. He's wonderful, thriving actually, going to school, making friends, eating like he's trying to make up for every meal he missed on the trail. Relief washed over Caleb's face so completely that Evelyn realized he'd been carrying worry about the boy all these months. You kept him then. I heard rumors in town last time I passed through, but I wasn't sure. I kept him. He's mine now, in all the ways that matter. That's good. Caleb's voice went rough. That's more than I hoped for. Thank you for giving him a home. I should be thanking you. For bringing him to us. For trusting us with him. She paused, weighing her next words. For the letter. For telling me the truth, even though it must have been hard. Caleb's jaw tightened. I should have told you sooner. Should have come the moment I heard where you were, instead of carrying that letter around for 3 years making excuses. You told me when I was ready to hear it. Maybe that's what mattered. Evelyn pulled her shawl tighter against the cold, snow catching in her hair, melting on her cheeks. I was angry at first, angry you'd known and said nothing those 3 days you stayed with us. But I understand now. Understanding grief doesn't make sharing it any easier. No, Caleb agreed quietly. It doesn't. They stood in awkward silence, snow falling around them, the sounds of the town muffled by the storm. Evelyn felt the weight of things unsaid pressing between them, questions she couldn't quite form, emotions she wasn't ready to name. I should let you get back to your herd, she said finally, and I need to get home before the roads become impossible. Will you be all right? The wagon in this weather? I've driven in worse. It was a lie, and they both knew it, but Evelyn needed to escape before she said something foolish, before the confusing mix of gratitude and attraction and old grief overwhelmed her good sense. Caleb studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Be safe, Miss Moore, and give Tommy my regards. He turned to leave, and Evelyn let him take 3 steps before the words burst out of her. Are you staying in town? While you wait out the storm? Caleb looked back, surprise flickering across his tired face. Was planning to. Why? We have room at the farm. If you'd rather have a real bed and hot meals instead of whatever accommodations the town can offer. The invitation tumbled out, rushed and awkward, but once started, she couldn't stop. Tommy would love to see you, and my mother's cooking is better than anything you'll find at the boarding house. I don't want to impose. You're not imposing. I'm offering. Evelyn's cheeks flushed, though whether from cold or embarrassment she couldn't say. You gave us Tommy. The least we can do is give you a decent place to stay for a few days. Caleb was quiet, his expression unreadable. Then that small, sad smile she remembered touched his mouth. All right. Thank you. I'll settle the herd and be out to your place before dark. Good. That's good. Evelyn descended the porch steps too quickly, nearly slipping on the snow-slick boards. I'll have a room ready. She fled before he could respond, loading her supplies into the wagon with shaking hands, cursing herself for the impulsive invitation. What had she been thinking? Having Caleb Ross stay at their farm, sleeping under their roof, sitting at their table. It was asking for complications she didn't need, emotions she wasn't ready to face. But it was too late to take it back now. The drive home took twice as long as usual, the wagon struggling through accumulating snow. By the time Evelyn reached the farm, she was half frozen and thoroughly questioning her judgment. But Tommy's reaction when she told him Caleb was coming made the discomfort worthwhile. Really? Mr. Ross is coming here? Tommy's face lit up with uncomplicated joy. Can I show him my room and my schoolwork? And the fort Benjamin and I built in the barn? Yes to all of that. But first we need to prepare the guest room and help Grandma with supper. Mr. Ross will be tired and hungry when he arrives. They worked together, changing sheets and laying a fire in the guest room fireplace, setting the table with their best dishes. Catherine raised an eyebrow when Evelyn explained about the invitation but said nothing, just prepared enough food to feed a hungry cowboy who'd been living on trail rations. Caleb arrived as promised, just as the early winter darkness was settling over the prairie. He knocked instead of just entering, waited on the porch with snow dusting his shoulders until Robert answered the door. Mr. Ross, welcome. Come in out of that cold before you freeze solid. Appreciate the hospitality, sir. Caleb removed his hat, stomped snow from his boots. I won't be any trouble. Trouble would be letting you stay in town when we've got a warm room and hot food right here. Evelyn says you're the one brought our Tommy to us. That makes you family as far as I'm concerned." The words made Caleb's expression do something complicated. He opened his mouth as if to respond, then seemed to think better of it and just nodded. Supper was a louder affair than usual. Tommy monopolized Caleb's attention, chattering about school and his friends and the harvest festival, barely pausing to breathe between stories. Caleb listened with patient attention, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested, his tired face softening as Tommy described his new life. "You've grown," Caleb observed. "Put on weight, got some color in your cheeks. I almost didn't recognize you." "Miss Evelyn feeds me a lot," Tommy said seriously. "And Mrs. Catherine makes the best pies. And I don't have nightmares as much anymore. Only sometimes." "That's good, son. That's real good." Watching them together, Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. Caleb had saved this boy's life by refusing to abandon him, by caring enough to find him a real home instead of just leaving him at the nearest orphanage. And now Tommy was thriving, was happy, was healing. That was Caleb's doing as much as hers. After supper, Tommy dragged Caleb upstairs to see his room, pointing out every treasure. The tin soldier he still kept by his bed, the carved horse from Benjamin, Sarah's pressed flower bookmark, Miguel's cowboy drawing. Evelyn followed, leaning against the doorframe, watching Caleb examine each item with the seriousness it deserved. "You've made a good home here," Caleb said quietly. "Your mother would be proud of who you're becoming." Tommy's face grew solemn. "Do you think she can see me from heaven?" "I think love doesn't end just because someone dies. I think she's with you in all the ways that matter." Caleb glanced at Evelyn, and she recognized her own words from months ago reflected back. "And I think she's grateful Miss Evelyn found you, that you found each other." "I'm grateful too." Tommy threw his arms around Caleb in an impulsive hug. "Thank you for not leaving me alone. Thank you for bringing me here." Caleb's arms came around the boy, his expression crumpling for just a moment before he controlled it. "You're welcome, son. You're so welcome." When Tommy was finally settled for the night, Evelyn found Caleb standing on the back porch, smoking and staring out at the snow-covered prairie. She pulled a shawl around her shoulders and joined him, the cold biting through her dress. "You'll freeze out here," Caleb observed, without looking at her. "So will you. Yet here you are." "Couldn't sleep. Too used to open sky, I guess. Rooms feel confining after months on the trail." They stood in companionable silence, watching snow fall in the darkness. Finally, Evelyn said, "Margaret told me you came through town back in the summer, that you asked about us but didn't come to the farm." "Didn't think I'd be welcome. Figured you'd need time to process everything, to hate me maybe for waiting so long to tell you the truth about Albright." "I did hate you, for about a day." Evelyn's breath plumed white in the frigid air. "Then I realized you'd given me a gift, even if it hurt. You freed me from waiting. You let me finally grieve and move forward. Still, I could have done it sooner, spared you years of—" "Stop!" The word came out sharp. "Stop punishing yourself for something that was never your responsibility. You didn't owe me anything. You were just a stranger who happened to be with James when he died, who was kind enough to carry a letter for 3 years trying to work up the courage to deliver it. That's not cruelty, Caleb. That's compassion, struggling with an impossible burden." He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and Evelyn saw the guilt he'd been carrying in every line of his face. "You're more forgiving than I deserve. Maybe I'm just tired of everyone carrying unnecessary guilt. God knows I carried enough of my own. Guilt for waiting so long, for not moving on, for wasting 5 years of my life on a dead man's promise." She pulled the shawl tighter, shivering. "We've both punished ourselves enough. Maybe it's time to let it go." "Is it that easy? Just deciding to let go?" "No, it's the hardest thing in the world, but I'm trying. Every day I'm trying to live in the present instead of the past, to build something new instead of mourning what I lost." She met his eyes. "You should try it too." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, then crushed out his cigarette under his boot heel. "I've been on the trail for 5 months straight, 4 different drives, barely a week between them, sleeping on hard ground, eating bad food, pushing myself until I'm too exhausted to think. You know why?" "Why?" Because when I'm working, I don't have to remember, don't have to feel. His voice went rough. But standing here with you, with Tommy asleep upstairs in a warm bed, seeing what you've built together, it makes me remember there are other ways to live. Better ways. Then why don't you? Because I don't know how anymore. The trail's all I know. It's been all I've known for 12 years since Rebecca died. Rebecca. Evelyn repeated the name gently. Your wife. And my daughter. They died together, both gone before I even knew I was going to be a father. Caleb's hands gripped the porch railing, knuckles white. I was working a drive when it happened. Got word 3 weeks too late to even attend the funeral. By the time I got back to Kansas, they were buried, the house was sold, and there was nothing left of the life I'd thought I was building. I'm so sorry. I joined up with the cavalry after that, figured I'd get myself killed doing something useful. That's how I met Albright. We mustered out together, decided to try prospecting, and then the mine collapsed and he died, and I lived and I've been running ever since, trying to outride the guilt of surviving when better men didn't. The confession hung between them, raw and painful. Evelyn reached out slowly, carefully, and placed her hand over his where it gripped the railing. His skin was cold, rough with calluses and old scars. You're allowed to survive, Caleb. You're allowed to live, to be happy, to build something instead of just running from what you've lost. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's the hardest thing in the world, but it's possible. I'm learning that slowly. Maybe you can learn it too. He turned his hand under hers, palm to palm, and the contact sent warmth racing up her arm despite the freezing air. They stood like that, hands joined, breath mingling white in the darkness, and Evelyn felt something dangerous stirring in her chest. Not love. It was too soon, too raw for that. But possibility. The faint, terrifying hope that maybe there was room in her healing heart for something new. I should go inside, she said, not moving. It's too cold out here. Yeah. Caleb's thumb traced a line across her palm, gentle and uncertain. You should. But neither of them moved. The snow fell around them, soft and silent, covering the world in white, and Evelyn felt suspended between past and future, caught in a moment that could tip either way. She could pull back, retreat into the safety of solitude, keep her heart locked away where it couldn't be hurt again. Or she could lean forward, take a risk, let herself feel something beyond grief and duty. The decision was made for her when Tommy's voice called from inside. Miss Evelyn? I can't sleep. Can you come read to me? The spell broke. Evelyn pulled her hand back, wrapping the shawl tight around herself. I should go. Of course. Caleb stepped back, putting proper distance between them. Thank you for the talk, and for understanding. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and fled into the house. Her hand tingled where his had touched it, and her heart hammered with something that felt dangerously like hope. The storm lasted 3 days, trapping Caleb at the farm while his herd waited in the town pens. They were strange days, intimate in the way that forced proximity creates intimacy. Caleb helped Robert with the barn roof repairs, accomplishing in hours what Evelyn had struggled with for days. He chopped firewood until they had enough to last the winter, fixed the chicken coop latch that had been broken for months, mended tack and harnesses with skilled hands. You're good at this, Robert observed, watching Caleb work. Ever think about settling somewhere instead of chasing cattle? Thought about it. Never seemed possible. Things that seem impossible have a way of becoming possible when you stop running long enough to see them. Evelyn tried to keep her distance, tried to maintain the boundaries of polite hospitality. But the farmhouse wasn't large, and Caleb kept appearing wherever she was, helping her carry water, fixing the sticky kitchen drawer she'd learned to live with, sitting at the table in the evening helping Tommy with arithmetic while she mended clothes by lamplight. She caught herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved, confident and capable, the rare smiles that transformed his serious face, the gentleness he showed Tommy, the respect he offered her parents, the quiet competence with which he approached every task. He caught her watching once, and their eyes met across the kitchen. Heat flooded her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Neither did he. The moment stretched, charged with unspoken possibilities, until Margaret burst in complaining about the cold and the spell shattered. On the second night after Tommy was asleep and her parents had retired, Evelyn found herself alone with Caleb in the parlor. She was working on her sewing and he was supposedly reading the newspaper, but the silence between them felt heavy with awareness. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said finally, setting aside the paper. "Of course." "That fence post, the one where you used to wait, do you still go there?" The question caught her off guard. "No, I haven't stood there since the day I read your letter. I burned James's letters that night, kept only yours, and I haven't gone back." "Why keep mine?" "As a reminder that truth matters more than comfort, that endings are necessary for new beginnings." She set down her sewing, meeting his eyes. "Why do you ask?" "Because I rode past it on my way here. There's a plaque on it now, brass, with an inscription. I couldn't read all of it in the snow, but I caught a few words. Something about waiting and finding." Evelyn's breath caught. "I didn't put that there. I didn't even know about it." "Your father, maybe? Or your mother?" "Maybe." The thought made her throat tight. Her parents had watched her suffer for 5 years, helpless to ease her pain. Perhaps they'd marked that place as a memorial to her waiting, a monument to hope that had finally been released. "What did you think when you saw it?" "That waiting can be holy, even when it's hopeless. That loving someone enough to keep faith with them, even after they're gone. There's something sacred in that." Caleb's voice went soft. Albright was a lucky man to be loved that way. He was a good man who died too young, trying to build a future he'd never have. There's nothing lucky about that. "No, but he had your love, even if only for a short time. Some men never have that at all." The weight of that statement settled between them. Evelyn thought about Caleb's wife, dead 12 years now, the woman he'd barely known but still mourned. She thought about William Garrett's wife, about Tommy's mother, about all the people who loved and lost and kept going anyway because that's what survival demanded. "Do you think you'll ever settle somewhere?" she asked. "Find a place that feels like home?" "Didn't think I would. Didn't think I deserved to, honestly." Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "But being here, seeing what you've built, it makes me think maybe I could. Maybe there's a way to live that isn't just running from ghosts." "What would you do? If you settled?" "Ranch work, probably. I'm good with horses, good at managing land and livestock. Could hire out to one of the big outfits, or maybe save enough to buy a small place of my own someday." He glanced at her. "What would you want if you could have anything?" The question was simple, but the answer was complex. Evelyn thought about the life she'd imagined with James, about the ranch, and the children, and the future that had died with him. Then she thought about what she actually had now, Tommy, and the farm, and the slow, careful rebuilding of herself. "I want what I have," she said slowly. "Tommy, my family, work that matters. Maybe eventually more children, if I can give them the home they deserve." She hesitated, then added carefully, "And maybe, someday, someone to share it with. Not to save me or complete me, but to build something alongside me. Partnership instead of rescue." "That's a good thing to want. What about you? What do you want, Caleb?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I want to stop running. I want to wake up in the same place twice in a row. I want to care about something beyond just the next drive, the next paycheck, the next town." His eyes found hers. "I want what you have, peace, purpose, a reason to stay." The confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and honest. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs, her sewing forgotten in her lap. This was dangerous territory they were wandering into, feelings emerging too fast, too intense, too complicated by grief and gratitude and lingering guilt. "The storm will break tomorrow," she said, retreating to safer ground. "You'll need to move your herd before another one hits." "I know." Caleb's expression shuddered, retreating from whatever precipice they'd been approaching. "I should probably turn in, get some rest before the push south." "Yes." "Good night, Mr. Ross." "Caleb, you should call me Caleb." "Caleb, then." She managed a small smile. "Good night." He left, and Evelyn sat alone in the parlor, heart racing, hands shaking as she tried to return to her sewing. She'd been alone for so long, 5 years waiting for a ghost, Then 6 months focused solely on Tommy and survival. The idea of opening her heart to someone new was terrifying. What if she got it wrong again? What if she invested hope and trust and love only to have it taken away? But what if she didn't? What if this time, with this man who understood loss and grief and the long road back to living, it could work? The storm broke as predicted, and by noon the next day, Caleb was preparing to leave. Tommy clung to him on the porch, making him promise to come back, to write letters, to not forget them. "I won't forget," Caleb said gently, ruffling the boy's hair. "You're not easy to forget, kid. Now you be good for Miss Evelyn, keep up with your schoolwork, help around the farm. And if you need anything, you write to me. I may not get the letters for months, but I'll answer when I can. Will you come back?" The question was simple, but the answer was complicated. Caleb's eyes found Evelyn's where she stood in the doorway, and something passed between them, question and possibility and carefully unspoken hope. "I'll try," Caleb told Tommy. "Can't make promises about the timing, but I'll try." It wasn't enough for the boy, but it was all Caleb could offer. He mounted his horse, settled his hat, then looked at Evelyn one more time. "Thank you for the hospitality, for everything. Thank you for Tommy, for the truth, for—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. For seeing her, for understanding, for making her feel alive again. Caleb seemed to understand anyway. That small, sad smile touched his mouth. "Take care of yourself, Evelyn Moore. And that boy. You're doing good work here." Then he was riding away, his figure growing smaller against the white landscape, and Evelyn stood watching until he disappeared completely. Tommy pressed against her side, both of them silent in their watching. "Will he really come back?" Tommy asked. "I don't know, sweetheart. Life on the trail is unpredictable. But you want him to. I can tell." Out of the mouths of children came uncomfortable truths. Evelyn looked down at Tommy's upturned face, saw the knowing in his young eyes, and couldn't bring herself to lie. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "I want him to come back." "Me too." Tommy slipped his hand into hers, squeezing tight. "I think he's lonely, like we used to be lonely." "Maybe he is. Then he should stay here, with us. We're not lonely anymore because we have each other. He could have that too." The simple logic of it nearly broke her. Evelyn pulled Tommy close, holding him tight, fighting tears she couldn't quite explain. "It's not that simple, love. Mr. Ross has his own life, his own path to walk. But maybe his path could be here. Maybe he just hasn't figured that out yet. Maybe." Or maybe Caleb would disappear back into the endless trail life. Another person who'd touched her life briefly, then moved on. Evelyn had learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it possible, that hope could be a poison as much as a balm. But as she led Tommy back inside, as she returned to the rhythms of daily life, she felt something different stirring in her chest. Not the desperate, clinging hope that had defined her waiting for James. Something quieter, more mature, more grounded in reality. The hope that maybe, just maybe, Caleb Ross would find his way back to them. Not because she needed saving, and not because he needed redemption, but because they'd each found in the other a mirror for their own grief and healing. Because sometimes the people who'd been most broken were the ones who could build the strongest things together. It was a fragile hope, easily disappointed. But it was real, and it was hers. And for the first time in 6 months, Evelyn allowed herself to feel it without fear. Winter settled over Wyoming with brutal cold and heavy snows. The cooperative schools suspended for the season, and life contracted to the small world of the farm. Morning chores, indoor lessons for Tommy, evening meals by firelight. Evelyn threw herself into work, into Tommy's education, into preparations for Christmas that would be their first real celebration as a family. William Garrett sent a letter inviting them for Christmas dinner at his ranch, along with Ruth and her brood. Evelyn accepted, grateful for the connection, for the reminder that they weren't as isolated as the Wyoming winter made them feel. Christmas Day arrived clear and cold, the world blanketed in white, and they made the journey to William's ranch bundled in furs and blankets. The house was warm and welcoming, filled with the smell of roasting meat and pine boughs. Emma launched herself at Tommy with unself-conscious joy, and the two disappeared upstairs to play while the adults gathered around the fire. William poured drinks, and Ruth produced gifts for all the children. Simple things, carved toys and mittens and books, but precious in their thoughtfulness. To survival, Ruth toasted, raising her glass, and to the families we've built from the wreckage of our losses. They drank to that, and Evelyn felt the truth of it settle warm in her chest. This strange, makeshift family of orphans and widows and grieving parents, they'd found each other, had created something whole from all their broken pieces. It wasn't the life any of them had planned, but it was good. It was enough. It was theirs. As the evening wound down and the children grew sleepy, William pulled Evelyn aside. "I wanted to ask you something," he said quietly. "Ruth mentioned you had a visitor during the October storm, the cowboy who brought Tommy to you." "Caleb Ross. He stayed a few days waiting out the weather." "And?" William's expression was carefully neutral. Are you... I'm not asking this well. What I mean is, should I step back? If there's something developing between you two, I don't want to complicate things." Evelyn was startled by the question, by the assumption underlying it. "There's nothing developing. He's a trail cowboy. He left, and I have no idea if he's even still in the territory." "But you'd want there to be something, if circumstances were different." The observation was too accurate to deny. Evelyn sighed, pulling her shawl tighter. "I don't know what I want, William. I'm still figuring out how to live in the present instead of the past. Adding romantic feelings to that seems like asking for disaster. Or asking for healing." William smiled gently. "I'm not offended, Evelyn. I value your friendship too much to push for something you're not ready for. But I also think you shouldn't be afraid of feelings just because they're complicated. Life is complicated. That doesn't make it less worth living." The wisdom in that stayed with her on the cold ride home, while Tommy dozed against her shoulder and her parents murmured quietly to each other. Maybe William was right. Maybe she was so afraid of being hurt again that she was closing herself off to possibility. But how did you balance hope with realism? How did you open your heart without setting yourself up for another 5 years of waiting? She didn't have answers. But as the new year approached, as 1877 dawned cold and bright over the Wyoming prairie, Evelyn made herself a promise. She would stay open. To friendship, to connection, to whatever possibilities life offered. She wouldn't wait anymore, wouldn't put her life on hold for maybes and some days. But she also wouldn't close herself off just because hope was frightening. She would live. Fully, presently, imperfectly. And if Caleb Ross rode back into her life, she'd face that moment when it came, without fear and without expectation. It was the best she could do, and for now, it was enough. Winter deepened its hold on Wyoming territory through January and into February, the kind of cold that made your lungs ache and turned breath to ice crystals in the air. The world contracted to the space between house and barn, the narrow paths shoveled through snow that reached past Evelyn's knees. Life became a series of small survivals, keeping the fire burning, keeping the animals fed, keeping Tommy occupied during the long dark evenings when cabin fever made him restless and short-tempered. "I miss school," he announced one particularly bitter afternoon, staring out the frosted window at the white expanse beyond. "I miss Benjamin and Sarah and Miguel. I miss having things to do besides chores." "I know, sweetheart." Evelyn set aside the sock she was darning, the fourth one that week with holes worn through the heel. "Tell you what, why don't we write them letters? You can practice your penmanship, and when the weather clears enough for the mail to get through, we'll send them." Tommy's face brightened marginally. "Can I tell them about the fox I saw? The one with the white-tipped tail?" "You can tell them anything you want." So they wrote letters, Tommy laboring over each word with tongue-poked concentration, Evelyn occasionally correcting his spelling, but mostly just letting him express himself. When he finished his letters to Ruth's children, he looked up at her with an expression that was trying very hard to be casual. "Should I write to Mr. Ross, too?" The question made Evelyn's hand still on her own letter to Ruth. "Do you want to write to him?" "Yeah, but I don't know where to send it. He moves around a lot." "We could send it care of the Cattlemen's Association in Cheyenne. They might be able to forward it to wherever he's working." Evelyn kept her voice carefully neutral, not wanting to show how much the idea appealed to her. She'd thought about Caleb constantly since October, wondered where he was, whether he was safe, whether he ever thought about those 3 days at the farm. Okay, I'll write him about the fox too, and about Christmas at Mr. Garrett's ranch, and about how I can read a whole chapter book now without help. Tommy pulled fresh paper toward him, enthusiasm renewed. Do you want to write to him too? The question was innocent, but it hit like a fist to her chest. Did she want to write to Caleb? Yes. God, yes. She wanted to tell him about Tommy's progress, about the quiet ways her grief continued to heal, about the strange ache his absence had left. But what would she say? What claim did she have on his attention beyond gratitude for bringing them Tommy? Maybe just a short note, she heard herself say, to go with yours, so he knows you're well. Tommy nodded, already bent over his letter, and Evelyn stared at her own blank page for a long moment before beginning to write. The words came harder than they should have. She started 3 times, crossing out formal openings that sounded stiff and distant. Finally, she let herself write simply, honestly, the way she might speak if he were sitting across from her at the kitchen table. Caleb, Tommy insisted on writing to you, so I thought I'd add a few lines of my own. We're managing the winter well enough, though the cold has been brutal and we're all eager for spring. Tommy is thriving, reading at a level beyond his years, helping with farm work without complaint, and only occasional nightmares now. You should be proud of the boy you saved. I am. The farm keeps us busy. Your repairs on the barn roof have held perfectly through the heavy snows. Thank you again for that. My father's arthritis makes him grateful someone thought to reinforce the chicken coop as well. Small kindnesses have large echoes in winter. I think of you often. I hope the trail is treating you well, that you're finding whatever it is you're searching for out there. And I hope, when the searching is done, you remember there's a place here where you'd be welcome. Not out of obligation or gratitude, but because you belong to this small family we've built, whether you realize it or not. Be safe. Come back when you can. Evelyn. She read it over 3 times, debating whether it was too much, too revealing, too presumptuous. But in the end, she folded it with Tommy's letter and sealed them both in an envelope addressed to the Cattlemen's Association. And when the weekly mail rider came through, she sent it before she could change her mind. Then came the waiting, different from the waiting she'd done for James, but waiting nonetheless. She checked with the mail rider every week, trying to seem casual about it, feeling foolish when there was nothing. Tommy asked about replies constantly at first, then gradually stopped asking as the weeks wore on with no response. Maybe he didn't get the letters, Tommy said one evening in late February, trying to hide his disappointment. Maybe they got lost. Maybe, Evelyn agreed, though privately she suspected Caleb had gotten the letters and simply hadn't known how to respond. Or worse, hadn't wanted to. Perhaps those 3 days at the farm had meant nothing to him, just another stop on an endless trail quickly forgotten in the press of work and distance. She tried not to let it hurt, tried to focus on the life she had rather than the connection she'd imagined. But the hurt was there anyway, a dull ache beneath her breastbone that reminded her why she'd been afraid to hope in the first place. March arrived with false promises of spring, a few warm days that melted the top layer of snow, followed by fresh storms that buried everything again. But gradually, incrementally, the days grew longer and the sun climbed higher, and the world began the slow business of thawing. By mid-March, the cooperative school resumed and Tommy's spirits lifted with the return to routine and friends. Ruth arrived early on the first day, her wagon loaded with children and supplies, her weathered face split in a grin. Thought we'd never make it through that winter, she declared, accepting coffee with grateful hands. Benjamin tried to murder Sarah twice, Miguel wouldn't stop crying for his mama, and I seriously considered joining a convent just for the peace and quiet. Evelyn laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuineness. Tommy asked me daily when school would start again. I think another week and we both might have lost our minds. That's winter in Wyoming, tests every relationship, every reserve of patience. Ruth studied Evelyn's face with her usual sharp assessment. You look better than when I saw you at Christmas, less haunted. I feel less haunted. The grief is still there, but it's different now, quieter. I can carry it without it crushing me. That's growth. Ruth set down her coffee cup. And speaking of growth, William Garrett asked me to ask you if you're coming to the spring dance in April. Apparently he was too shy to ask directly. Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. There's a spring dance? First Saturday in April at the Grange Hall in town. Everyone comes, families, single folk.
even cranky old widows like me. It's a chance to remember we're human instead of just work animals. Ruth's eyes glinted with amusement. William specifically wants to know if you'll save him a dance. I think the man's been working up courage all winter to ask. I don't know. I haven't been to a dance since... She trailed off, remembering.
The last dance she'd attended had been a cavalry ball in Cheyenne, September 1868, with James Albright's arm around her waist and his voice in her ear promising futures they'd never have. Since before, Ruth finished gently. I know, but maybe it's time for new memories. Better memories. The thought was both appealing and terrifying. Evelyn had spent so long living in the past, so long defining herself by loss and waiting, that the idea of deliberately creating new joy felt almost transgressive, as if she'd be betraying James by daring to be happy without him. But James was dead, had been dead for years, and Evelyn was alive. Wasn't that what she'd promised herself? To live fully, presently, without letting fear of pain prevent her from experiencing joy? Tell William yes, she said before she could reconsider. I'll save him a dance. Ruth's approving nod felt like a benediction. The older woman had become something of a touchstone for Evelyn, a model of how to survive loss without becoming bitter, how to build new life from grief's wreckage. If Ruth thought she was ready for something as frivolous and normal as a spring dance, then maybe she was. The weeks leading up to the dance were busy with preparations. Catherine insisted on making Evelyn a new dress, something pretty and impractical, the first truly nice clothing Evelyn had owned since her waiting years when she'd carefully maintained her appearance just in case James came home. They chose fabric in deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, with a fitted bodice and full skirts that made her feel almost girlish again. You're too young to dress like a widow forever, Catherine said firmly, pinning the hem. 28 is hardly ancient. You've got years ahead of you yet, and I'll be damned if I let you spend them in brown worsted and regret. Margaret, delighted to have her sister showing interest in anything beyond farm work and Tommy's education, took charge of Evelyn's hair. She experimented with different styles, finally settling on an elegant upswept arrangement with small fabric flowers tucked into the coils. You look beautiful, Margaret declared the night of the dance, standing back to admire her work. Like yourself again. Like the Evie you were before everything went wrong. But Evelyn, studying her reflection, saw someone different from the girl she'd been at 23. That Evelyn had been naive, convinced that love and promises were enough to overcome anything. This Evelyn had been carved hollow by grief and slowly, painfully filled back up with harder, more valuable things. Resilience, compassion, the understanding that survival itself was a form of courage. I don't think I'm that Evie anymore, she said quietly. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. The Grange Hall was transformed for the occasion, lanterns strung from the rafters, long tables laden with food, a small group of musicians tuning their instruments in the corner. The whole community had turned out, families Evelyn knew by sight, but rarely spoke to, ranchers who lived 20 miles out and only came to town for occasions like this. The noise and warmth and press of bodies was overwhelming after the isolation of winter. Tommy immediately found Ruth's children and disappeared into the gaggle of young people who weren't quite children anymore, but hadn't yet crossed into the self-consciousness of adolescence. Evelyn watched him go with a mixture of pride and melancholy. He was growing up, growing away from the traumatized boy who'd arrived 9 months ago. Soon he wouldn't need her the way he did now. Evening, Evelyn. She turned to find William Garrett beside her, cleaned up and dressed in what must be his best clothes. Dark trousers, white shirt, a vest that had seen better days but was carefully mended. His hair was slicked back, his face shaved smooth, and he looked both hopeful and terrified. William, you look nice. So do you. Real nice. He cleared his throat. I was hoping you'd save me that dance, if you're still willing. I'm willing, though I should warn you, I haven't danced in 9 years. I might step on your feet. I'll risk it. The musicians struck up a waltz, couples moving onto the floor with the easy familiarity of people who'd danced together countless times. William offered his hand and Evelyn took it, letting him lead her into the pattern. She stumbled at first, her body remembering rhythms her mind had forgotten, but William was patient and steady, and gradually the steps came back to her. You're doing fine, he murmured as they turned. Better than fine. I'm surprised I remember how. Some things the body doesn't forget. William's hand was warm at her waist, his grip careful and respectful. I'm glad you came tonight. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. It felt strange, the idea of doing something purely for enjoyment. I've spent so long just surviving that I forgot how to simply live. I know the feeling. After Rebecca died, I spent 2 years doing nothing but work and taking care of Emma. It wasn't until Ruth practically dragged me to a community gathering that I remembered there was supposed to be more to life than duty. He smiled ruefully. Still working on finding that balance, honestly. They danced in companionable silence for a while, and Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. This was nice. Normal. A widower and an almost widow dancing at a spring social, two people who'd survived loss, finding brief respite in music and movement. There was no pressure, no expectation, just this moment and the next, simple and uncomplicated. When the song ended, William escorted her off the floor and fetched them both punch. They stood against the wall watching the dancers, making occasional observations about who was courting whom and which children were likely to cause trouble before the night ended. Can I ask you something? William said eventually. And you don't have to answer if it's too personal. Go ahead. The cowboy who stayed with you during the October storm, Ruth mentioned him. She said you seemed different after he left, like something had shifted. I was just wondering if... He trailed off, clearly struggling with how to phrase the question. If I have feelings for him? Evelyn finished quietly. When William nodded, she took a breath and chose honesty. I don't know, maybe. He understood things about loss and grief that most people don't. He saw me as a whole person instead of just the crazy woman who waited at the fence. And he gave me Tommy, gave me a reason to start living again instead of just existing. She paused. But he's gone. Probably won't come back. And I'm here. So whatever I might feel doesn't matter much. It matters. William's voice was firm. Feelings always matter, even if they don't lead anywhere. And for what it's worth, I think you deserve someone who sees you clearly, who understands what you've been through. If that's this cowboy, then I hope he has the sense to come back. But if he doesn't, he met her eyes. There are other men who see you just as clearly and would count themselves lucky to build something with you. The meaning was unmistakable. Evelyn felt her throat tighten with a confusing mix of gratitude and panic. William was a good man, steady and kind, exactly the sort of person she should want. But her treacherous heart refused to settle, kept reaching toward someone who existed more in absence than presence. I'm not ready, she said gently, for anything beyond friendship. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. That's all right. I'm a patient man. William smiled, but there was sadness in it. And I meant what I said. Your friendship is valuable on its own. I'm not waiting with some agenda, Evelyn. I'm just here, and I'll still be here whether anything more develops or not. The conversation was interrupted by Tommy appearing at Evelyn's elbow, breathless and excited. Miss Evelyn, you have to come see. Benjamin taught me a card trick, and I can do it perfectly now. You have to watch. She let herself be dragged away, grateful for the interruption, and spent the next hour being shown various tricks and games the children had invented. By the time she looked up again, William had been claimed by his daughter for a dance, and Ruth was holding court near the punch bowl surrounded by ranchers' wives. The evening wore on with music and laughter and the simple pleasure of community. Evelyn danced with her father, clumsy but affectionate, and with 3 different ranchers who'd known her during her waiting years and seemed pleased to see her rejoining the living. She ate too much cake and listened to too much gossip, and let herself simply be present in a way she hadn't managed in longer than she could remember. It was near midnight when she stepped outside for air, the hall grown warm and close with too many bodies. The April night was cool but not cold, the sky brilliant with stars, and Evelyn leaned against the building breathing in the scent of sage and distant rain. Miss Moore? Her heart stopped. She knew that voice, would know it anywhere after how many times she'd heard it in memory. She turned slowly, half convinced she was imagining things, and found Caleb Ross standing 10 feet away, hat in hands, looking travel-worn and uncertain. Caleb. His name came out barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? Got your letter, and Tommy's. Was working a ranch 40 miles north, bought into a partnership there last month. Thought I'd ride down, see how you both were doing. He shifted his weight. Didn't mean to interrupt your evening. Saw the lights, figured there was some kind of gathering. I can come back another time. No. The word burst out sharper than she intended. Evelyn stepped forward, her pulse hammering. Don't go, please. I'm glad you're here. Caleb's expression shifted, hope and relief warring with something more complicated. Got your letter in January, but I was in the middle of nowhere with no way to respond. Then I took the ranch job, got an actual address where mail could reach me, and I didn't know what to write. Everything I tried sounded wrong. He took a tentative step closer. So I figured I'd just come in person instead. Let you know I got the letters, that they meant something. They did? Mean something? Yeah. His voice went rough. You said I belonged to your family, that I should come back when I could. That's been rattling around in my head for 3 months. Couldn't stop thinking about it, about you and Tommy, about those 3 days at the farm, about how it felt like home in a way nothing's felt like home in 12 years. Evelyn's breath caught. This was what she'd hoped for, wasn't it? What she'd barely let herself imagine during the long winter months. But now that it was happening, now that Caleb was standing in front of her saying these things, she felt paralyzed by fear. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared to hope for something again. Scared to care about someone who might leave or die or just decide I'm not worth the trouble. I've already lost too much, Caleb. I don't know if I can survive losing anything else. I know. I'm scared too. Caleb closed the distance between them, stopping just within reach. But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life running from ghosts, never letting myself care about anything, because caring means risk. You were right about what you said in your letter. I've been searching for something out there on the trail, but I think what I've been searching for was here all along. I was just too scared to see it. Here? The word came out breathless. Here. With you. With Tommy. With the possibility of building something instead of just surviving day to day. His hand lifted as if to touch her face, then dropped. I'm not asking for promises, Evelyn. I'm not asking you to wait for me or plan a future together or anything you're not ready for. I'm just asking if maybe we could try. Take it slow, see where it goes, give each other the chance to build something real instead of just carrying our separate griefs around forever. Through the open door of the Grange Hall, Evelyn could hear music and laughter, the sounds of normal life continuing. Inside, Tommy was playing with his friends. William was probably watching the door, wondering where she'd gone. Her family waited, her community, her carefully rebuilt life. But standing here with Caleb under the brilliant Wyoming stars, Evelyn felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. The wild, terrifying hope of new possibility. Not the naive hope of her younger self who'd thought love could conquer anything. Mature hope, earned through suffering, tempered by loss, but real nonetheless. I'm not who I was when James left, she said carefully. I'm harder now, more careful. I have Tommy to think about, responsibilities you'd be taking on if you stayed, and I won't wait at a fence ever again, Caleb. If you're going to be in my life, you have to actually be in it, present, committed, choosing to stay instead of choosing to run. I understand. And I need time. We need time to figure out what this is, what it could be, without rushing or making promises we're not ready to keep. I can give you time. I've got the ranch job. It's steady work, good pay, a real place to live instead of just following cattle. I'll be around. We can do this as slow as you need. Evelyn searched his face, looking for any sign of uncertainty or insincerity, but Caleb met her gaze steadily, his eyes honest and open in a way that made her chest ache. He'd been running for 12 years, and now he was choosing to stay. For her, for Tommy, for the possibility of home. All right, she heard herself say. We can try. Carefully. Slowly. But we can try. The smile that broke across Caleb's face transformed him, years of weariness falling away to reveal something younger and more hopeful beneath. Thank you. You won't regret it, Evelyn, I swear. Don't make promises yet. But she was smiling too, couldn't help it. Just keep showing up. That's all I need. Someone who shows up. I can do that. I will do that. Behind them, the door to the Grange Hall opened and Tommy emerged, clearly looking for her. He stopped dead when he saw Caleb,
his eyes going wide with shock and delight. "Mr. Ross, you came back!" Tommy launched himself at Caleb, who caught him easily, lifting him in a hug that made the boy laugh. "You got my letter. Did you see my penmanship? Miss Evelyn says it's much improved." "It was excellent penmanship. Best letter I've received in years." Caleb set Tommy down but kept a hand on his shoulder. "I came to see how you were doing. Looks like you're doing pretty well." "I am. I can read a whole book now, and I'm learning multiplication, and Benjamin and I built a fort that survived the whole winter without collapsing." The words tumbled out in Tommy's excitement. "Are you staying? Please say you're staying, at least for a little while?" Caleb glanced at Evelyn, question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, giving permission, and watched something settle in him. Relief and rightness, and the beginning of belief that maybe this could actually work. "I'm staying," Caleb told Tommy. "Got a job at a ranch north of here. I'll be around pretty regular from now on." "Really? That's perfect." Tommy grabbed both their hands, linking them together. "Now we can be a proper family. That's what I wished for on my birthday, and Miss Evelyn said sometimes wishes come true even if you don't tell them." Out of the mouths of children came devastatingly simple truths. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at this boy who'd lost everything and somehow still believed in wishes and families and happy endings. Then she looked at Caleb and saw her own emotion reflected back. Wonder and fear and the fragile beginning of hope. "Come on," she said, squeezing both their hands. "Let's go back inside. The music's still playing, and I think Mr. Ross might owe us both a dance." They went together into the light and warmth of the Grange Hall. Three people who'd survived separate griefs now finding their way toward something that might, with time and care and no small amount of courage, become whole. People turned to stare as they entered. The woman who'd waited at the fence, the orphan boy she'd taken in, and the cowboy who'd finally stopped running. Let them stare, Evelyn thought. Let them wonder and gossip and speculate. She'd spent 5 years living for other people's opinions, letting their judgment define her reality. No more. This was her life, Tommy's life, Caleb's life, and they'd build it however they saw fit. The music swelled, and Caleb offered his hand for a dance. Evelyn took it, letting him lead her onto the floor where other couples moved in familiar patterns. His hand at her waist felt different from William's, less careful, more certain, carrying the weight of shared understanding. They'd both loved and lost. They both knew grief's landscape. That knowledge didn't make love easier, but it made it real in a way that shallow attraction never could be. "Thank you," Caleb said quietly as they turned. "For giving me a chance. For believing I could stop running. Thank you for coming back, for seeing something worth staying for." Evelyn's voice caught. "I thought I was done hoping for anything beyond survival, but here we are." "Here we are," he echoed, and in his eyes, Evelyn saw the same cautious optimism she felt. The sense that maybe, despite everything they'd lost, despite all the grief they'd carried, they might be able to build something good. Not perfect, not easy, but good. Real. Worth fighting for. The song ended, and another began. Tommy appeared claiming Caleb for a dance, and Evelyn stood against the wall watching them together. The man who'd saved the boy who'd saved the woman, all of them saving each other in ways large and small. Ruth caught her eye from across the room and raised her punch cup in approval. William nodded acknowledgement, accepting with grace that whatever might have been between them was firmly in the realm of friendship now. Margaret materialized at Evelyn's elbow, eyes bright with curiosity. "Who is that man dancing with Tommy, and why are you crying?" "I'm not crying." But she was, tears sliding down her cheeks, though whether they were sad or happy or some combination she couldn't say. "That's Caleb Ross. He's the one who brought Tommy to us. And he's staying, at least for now." "You like him?" It wasn't a question. "I think I might. Is that crazy? After everything I went through, after 5 years of waiting for a dead man, to let myself care about someone new?" "It's not crazy." Margaret slipped her arm around Evelyn's waist, leaning her head on her sister's shoulder. "It's brave, and you deserve to be happy, Evie. You've earned it 10 times over." Maybe she had. Maybe all the waiting and grief and slow rebuilding had been preparing her for this,
for the courage to hope again, differently this time, with eyes open to risk and loss, but also to possibility. She'd loved James truly, but that love had been born in desperation and preserved in absence. This thing with Caleb, whatever it became, would be built in presence and reality and the daily choice to keep choosing each other. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. It was life finally moving forward instead of circling endlessly around the same painful point. The dance ended near 2 in the morning, families collecting sleepy children and heading home through the spring darkness. Evelyn bundled Tommy into the wagon where he immediately fell asleep against her shoulder, exhausted by excitement and late hours. Caleb walked them out, helping Robert with the horses, his movements easy and familiar, as if he'd been part of their family for years instead of days. "Will you come by the farm tomorrow?" Evelyn asked as he prepared to ride back to his ranch. "Tommy will want to show you everything, and I think my parents would like to thank you properly for all the repairs you did in October." "I'd like that." Caleb's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezed gently. "And Evelyn? I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me now." "Good," she whispered. "Don't let me scare you off when I get frightened and difficult. I will get frightened. I'll probably push you away and test whether you mean what you say. I know, I'll probably do the same. We both got scars that haven't finished healing." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "But we'll figure it out. Together." The words settled between them like a promise. Together. Not her alone at a fence waiting, not him alone on the trail running. Together, building something new from the wreckage of what they'd lost. As the wagon pulled away, Evelyn looked back once and saw Caleb silhouetted against the lit windows of the Grange Hall, watching them go. He raised his hand in farewell, and she lifted hers in response. Then the darkness swallowed him, but this time the disappearance didn't feel like an ending. It felt like punctuation, a comma instead of a period, a pause in a story still unfolding. Tommy stirred against her shoulder, murmuring something in his sleep. Evelyn held him close, feeling the weight of him warm and real and alive, and thought about how strange life was. A year ago, she'd been standing at a fence, waiting for a ghost. Now she had a son and a home, and the beginning of something that might become love, given time. The fence still stood on the eastern edge of their property, the brass plaque her parents had placed there catching moonlight as they passed. Evelyn read the inscription they'd chosen, words she hadn't known about until Caleb mentioned them. "For those who wait with faith. For those who find it last." It wasn't the ending she'd imagined when she first started waiting. James wasn't coming home. The future she'd planned had died with him in a Colorado mine. But maybe that was all right. Maybe some endings cleared space for better beginnings. Maybe faith wasn't about rigid certainty, but about staying open to possibilities you couldn't predict. The wagon rolled on through the Wyoming darkness toward home, and Evelyn let herself feel it all. The grief that still lived in her bones, the hope that was slowly rebuilding itself, the love she already felt for Tommy, and the love that might grow for Caleb if she was brave enough to let it. All of it together, complicated and messy and real, more honest than anything she'd felt during those 5 years of careful waiting. This was living, not the waiting for life to begin, but the actual living of it in all its painful, beautiful, unpredictable glory. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Evelyn felt grateful to be alive to experience it. Spring unfurled across Wyoming territory with the gentle insistence of something that had earned its arrival. The prairie transformed from brown to green almost overnight, wildflowers erupting in riots of color that made Tommy whoop with delight every morning. The world felt new, scrubbed clean by winter's harshness, ready for whatever came next. Caleb became a fixture in their lives with a naturalness that surprised everyone, especially Evelyn. He rode over from his ranch 3 or 4 times a week, always with some practical excuse, helping Robert repair fencing, bringing supplies from town, checking on a horse that had gone lame. But the excuses grew thinner as the weeks passed, and eventually he stopped bothering with them altogether. He came because he wanted to be there, and they wanted him there, and that was reason enough. Tommy bloomed under the attention. He followed Caleb everywhere when he visited, pestering him with endless questions about ranching and horses and what it had been like on the cattle drives. Caleb answered with patience that seemed inexhaustible, teaching the boy to properly saddle a horse, to read weather signs in the sky, to whittle small figures from scraps of wood. "You're good with him," Evelyn observed one afternoon, watching from the porch as Caleb showed Tommy how to throw a rope. "Patient in a way most men aren't with children. I like him. He's smart, curious, brave, considering what he's been through." Caleb demonstrated the throw again, the rope arcing through the air to settle perfectly around the fence post. "And maybe I'm making up for the child I never got to raise. Rebecca died before I even knew she was pregnant. Sometimes I wonder who that baby would have been, what kind of father I might have been." The admission was quiet, vulnerable. Evelyn moved down the porch steps to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You would have been a good father. You are being a good father. To Tommy. He looks at you like you hung the moon. He looks at you the same way. You're his whole world, Evelyn. Everything he's become is because of you." "No, it's because of you bringing him here. Because of him being brave enough to heal. We're all building this together." She paused, then added carefully, "That's what families do, isn't it? Build things together." Caleb's eyes found hers, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement of what they were becoming, what they might already be if they were brave enough to name it. But neither spoke the words aloud. It was too soon, too fragile, too precious to risk with premature declarations. Instead, Caleb reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You're beautiful when you smile like that. Did you know?" Like the sun coming out after a long storm. Heat flooded her face. "That's poetry for a cowboy." "Even cowboys can appreciate beauty when we find it." His hand dropped, but his eyes stayed on hers. "I'm trying to take this slow like you asked. But it's hard, Evelyn. When I'm with you, all I want is to pull you close and promise you everything and ask you to build a whole life with me. The restraint is killing me." "Good." Her voice came out breathless. "It's killing me too. But we need to do this right, Caleb. For Tommy's sake, if not our own. He's already lost so much. I won't let him get attached to you and then have you disappear if we rush into something we're not ready for." "I'm not going to disappear." "You say that now, but what if this thing between us doesn't work? What if we realize we made a mistake, that grief made us see things that weren't really there?" She twisted her hands together, old fears surfacing. "I can't survive another loss. And I won't let Tommy survive one either." Caleb caught her hand, stilling their anxious movement. "Then we won't lose each other. We'll work through whatever comes up, communicate instead of running, build something strong enough to weather the hard times." His grip tightened. "I spent 12 years running from grief, Evelyn. I know what that looks like, and this isn't it. What I feel for you isn't just shared trauma or loneliness. It's real, it's solid, and it's worth fighting for." "How do you know? How can you be sure?" "Because when I'm here, I don't want to be anywhere else, because I think about you constantly when I'm gone. Because watching you with Tommy, seeing the life you've built, makes me want things I thought I'd given up on forever." He pulled her closer, until mere inches separated them. "And because when I look at you, I don't just see someone who understands my grief. I see someone brave and kind and stronger than she knows. Someone I could spend the rest of my life learning to love better." The words landed in her chest like stones dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward. Could spend the rest of my life. Not a promise, not yet, but possibility. The shape of a future they might build together if they were careful and brave and lucky. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too. But I think we can be scared together. That's better than being scared alone." Before she could respond, Tommy's excited shout interrupted them. "I did it! Miss Evelyn, Mr. Ross, I got the rope around the post on my first try." They sprang apart like guilty children, and Evelyn couldn't help laughing at the absurdity of it. Here they were, two adults who'd survived more loss than most people experienced in a lifetime, acting like teenagers caught by a chaperone. Caleb grinned at her, unrepentant. "We'll continue this conversation later." "Will we?" "Count on it." But the conversation didn't continue that day or the next or the one after that. Life intervened with its usual demands. Spring planting that required every hand, a sick calf that needed round-the-clock care, Tommy catching a cold that had Evelyn up 3 nights straight. By the time things settled again, 2 weeks had passed and the moment felt lost. Except it wasn't lost, Evelyn realized. It had just expanded, becoming part of the fabric of their days. Every time Caleb showed up at the farm, every shared meal and quiet conversation, every moment watching him teach Tommy something new, these were all continuations of that conversation. They were courting in the old-fashioned sense, learning each other slowly, building foundation instead of rushing to construct walls before the ground was solid. It was Ruth who finally called them out on it, arriving one morning in early May with her usual blunt assessment of the situation. "You two are being ridiculous," she announced without preamble, accepting coffee on the porch while the children played in the yard. "Dancing around each other like nervous colts. Everyone can see you're in love. Why not just admit it and get on with things?" Evelyn nearly choked on her coffee. We haven't. It's too soon to call it love." "Is it? You've known each other almost a year now. He brought you Tommy, told you the truth about that soldier you were waiting for, stopped running long enough to put down roots. You've given him a place to belong, shown him what family looks like, let him into your life and Tommy's. If that's not love, what is it?" "It's complicated." "Love usually is. That doesn't make it less real." Ruth's weathered face softened. "I've watched a lot of people try to rebuild after loss, Evelyn. Most of them either rush into something new trying to fill the hole, or they wall themselves off so completely they die inside while still breathing. You and Caleb are doing something different. You're taking it slow enough to be real, but not so slow you talk yourselves out of happiness. That takes wisdom. But there comes a point where caution becomes cowardice." The words stung because they were true. Evelyn had been so focused on protecting herself and Tommy from potential loss that she hadn't noticed she was also protecting herself from potential joy. Caleb had proven his commitment over and over in the past 2 months. He'd shown up consistently, integrated himself into their lives with care and respect, demonstrated that his feelings weren't just the product of shared grief. "What if I fail at this?" Evelyn asked quietly. "What if I don't know how to love someone properly anymore? I spent 5 years loving a ghost, Ruth. That's not healthy. That's not normal. What if I'm too damaged to build something real? Then you'll figure it out together. That's what partnership means. Two imperfect people choosing each other anyway, working through the damage and complications as they come." Ruth set down her cup with a decisive clink. "Stop waiting for perfect conditions, Evelyn. Perfect never comes. You've got a good man who loves you and your boy, who's proven he'll stay even when things are hard. That's as close to perfect as life gets." After Ruth left, Evelyn stood on the porch watching Caleb and Tommy work with the horses. The boy was laughing at something Caleb said, his whole face lit with happiness. And Caleb was smiling too, that rare, unguarded smile that transformed his usual serious expression into something younger and lighter. This was her family, she realized. However unconventional, however unexpected, this was what family looked like now. A boy she hadn't birthed, but loved like her own. A man she hadn't planned on, but couldn't imagine her life without. A future built from the wreckage of the past, imperfect and real and worth fighting for. The decision settled in her chest with quiet certainty. It was time to stop being scared. Time to choose hope over fear, possibility over protection. Time to let herself love again, messily and imperfectly, and with full knowledge that loss was always possible, but so was joy. That evening, after Tommy was in bed and her parents had retired, Evelyn found Caleb on the back porch as had become his habit. He was smoking and staring at the stars, and he looked so solid and real and present that her heart ached with it. "Caleb," he turned, stub of cigarette forgotten between his fingers. "Everything all right?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about spending the rest of your life learning to love me better." She moved closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. "I want that. I want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like. I want to stop being scared and start being brave." The cigarette dropped from his fingers, crushed under his boot heel as he reached for her. "You mean it? You're sure?" "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but I'm sure. You've proven yourself over and over, Caleb. You're not going to run. You're not going to leave. And I'm done punishing us both for something you haven't done and won't do." His hands cupped her face, thumbs tracing the curve of her cheekbones. "I love you, Evelyn Moore. I've loved you since that first night at the fence when you talked about waiting, and I saw how brave you'd been. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you love Tommy with your whole heart. I love who you've been and who you're becoming, and I want to be part of whatever comes next." Tears spilled over, running down to meet his thumbs. "I love you too. I didn't think I could love anyone again, not after James, not after wasting so much time. But you make it easy. You make it feel right." "It is right." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she didn't. She rose on her toes to meet him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, learning the shape of each other. Then deeper, more certain, carrying all the words they hadn't said and promises they were finally brave enough to make. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they felt inevitable, right? Like the only logical conclusion to everything that had come before. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." His arms came around her, pulling her close, and Evelyn let herself be held, let herself feel safe and loved and chosen. For so long she'd stood alone at that fence, convinced she had to be strong enough to survive anything by herself. But this, being held by someone who understood her grief and loved her anyway, this was a different kind of strength. The strength of two scarred people choosing to heal together instead of apart. "When?" Caleb murmured against her hair. "Soon. Why wait? We've both waited long enough for happiness. Let's just take it while we can." "Soon, then." She felt him smile. "Though we should probably tell Tommy first. Make sure he's all right with this. He's going to be thrilled. He's been trying to engineer this since the spring dance." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other in the quiet Wyoming night, making plans in whispers and stolen kisses. They'd marry at the farm, they decided, with family and friends and the community that had supported them both. Ruth would stand up with Evelyn, and Robert would give her away. Tommy would be part of the ceremony, officially becoming Caleb's son in the eyes of the law. They'd add on to the farmhouse to give them all more room, or maybe build a small cabin nearby. Details to be worked out, but the shape of their future was clear. Morning came too soon, golden light spilling across the prairie. Evelyn woke to find Tommy already up and bouncing with excitement she hadn't explained yet. "Mr. Ross is here again," he announced, bursting into her room without knocking. "He brought his horse and a whole bunch of supplies, and Papa said he's staying for breakfast and maybe all day." "Tommy, slow down. What's gotten into you?" "Mr. Ross is smiling, like really smiling. And you were smiling last night when you came inside. Did something happen? Did he finally ask you to marry him like I told him to?" Evelyn sat up, trying to look stern and failing. "You told him to ask me to marry him?" "Last week. I said he should stop being scared and just do it because we both wanted him to be part of our family forever, and grown-ups are dumb about feelings sometimes." Tommy bounced on the edge of her bed. "So did he? Did he ask you?" "He did, and I said yes." The whoop Tommy let out could probably be heard in town. He threw himself at her in a hug so fierce it knocked her back against the pillows, both of them laughing and crying at once. "We're going to be a real family," Tommy crowed, "with a mama and a papa and me, just like I wished for." "You wished for this?" "On my birthday, and when I blew out the candles at Christmas, and every night when I see the first star. I wished so hard, Miss Evelyn. I wished you'd be happy again, and Mr. Ross would stay, and we'd all be together." Her heart cracked open, so full of love for this boy it was almost painful. "Your wishes came true, sweetheart. All of them." They went downstairs together to find Caleb already helping Catherine with breakfast, looking more at home in their kitchen than Evelyn had ever seen him. He glanced up when they entered, and the smile that spread across his face when he saw Tommy bouncing with excitement was pure joy. "I take it you told him," Caleb said. "He figured it out on his own, apparently." Evelyn moved to his side, letting herself lean against him in a way that felt both terrifying and natural. "He's been wishing for this." "Smart kid." Caleb ruffled Tommy's hair, then looked at him seriously. "Tommy, I want to ask you something important. I'm going to marry your Miss Evelyn, but I also want to officially adopt you if you'll let me. Make you my son in the eyes of the law. Give you my name if you want it. Would that be all right with you?" Tommy's eyes went wide and wet. "Really?
I could be Tommy Ross. If you want, or you could keep your mother's name. I know she was important to you.
Or you could be Tommy Ross Hayes. Use both names, whatever feels right to you.
I want to be Tommy Ross, the boy said without hesitation.
Mama would understand. She'd want me to have a family, to belong somewhere.
He looked between them, suddenly anxious.
You're not going to leave, right? You're going to stay even when things get hard?
Caleb knelt down so they were eye level.
I'm going to stay. That's a promise, son. I've spent 12 years running from grief and loss, but I'm done running now. This is my family, and family means staying even when it's hard, especially when it's hard.
Tommy threw his arms around Caleb's neck, and Evelyn watched them hold each other, these two people who'd both lost so much and somehow found each other. Her vision blurred with tears, but they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that washed away old pain to make room for new joy.
The wedding was planned for the first Saturday in June, giving them a month to prepare, but not so long that doubt could creep in. The whole community seemed to embrace the news with genuine happiness. Ruth immediately took charge of organizing, declaring that after everything Evelyn had been through, she deserved a proper celebration. William Garrett offered sincere congratulations and asked if he could give a toast at the reception. Margaret threw herself into dress preparations with gleeful enthusiasm. The only person who seemed hesitant was Robert. He cornered Evelyn one evening in the barn while she was feeding the chickens, his weathered face unreadable.
You sure about this, Evie? It's only been 2 months since he came back into your life. That's not much time to build a marriage on. We've actually known each other a year, Papa, and we've both lived enough life to know what we want. She set down the feed bucket, meeting her father's eyes. I know it seems fast, but I've already wasted 5 years waiting. I don't want to waste any more time being careful when I know in my bones this is right. What if you're wrong? What if this Caleb turns out to be different than you think? Then we'll deal with it together. But Papa, I'm not wrong about him. He's proven himself over and over. He brought us Tommy. He told me the truth about James, even though it was hard. He came back when he could have kept running. He stayed even when staying is scary. She took her father's rough hands in hers. I love him. Maybe not the same way I loved James. I'm not the same person I was then, but I love him truly, and he loves me, and that's enough. Robert was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then his expression softened. You do look different, lighter somehow, like you've finally put down something heavy you were carrying. I have. I've put down the grief and the waiting and the fear. I'm choosing joy now, Papa. I'm choosing to live. Then I'm happy for you, girl. And I'll walk you down that aisle with pride. He pulled her into a rare hug, his voice gruff with emotion. Your mama and I, we just want you to be happy. We've watched you suffer too long. If this cowboy makes you happy, then he's welcome in our family. The weeks flew by in a blur of preparations. Evelyn sewed her wedding dress with Margaret's help, a simple but elegant creation in cream-colored silk that Catherine had been saving for years. Tommy got a new suit that he complained made him look like a city boy, but he preened in it nonetheless. Caleb rode into town and came back with rings, simple gold bands that he'd had engraved with their initials and the date. Ruth and her children arrived 3 days before the wedding to help with final preparations. The farmhouse buzzed with activity, children underfoot, women cooking and decorating, men building extra tables for the reception. It felt like what Evelyn imagined normal families must feel like, chaotic and loud and full of life. The night before the wedding, Evelyn stood at the fence post where she'd spent so many evenings waiting. She hadn't been there since reading Caleb's letter about James, hadn't felt the need. But tonight, on the eve of her new beginning, she felt drawn to it one last time. The brass plaque her parents had placed gleamed in the moonlight. For those who wait with faith. For those who find at last. The words held different meaning now. She'd waited with faith for James, and she'd found Caleb at last. Both were true. Both mattered. Thought I might find you here. She turned to find Caleb approaching, his face shadowed but familiar. Couldn't sleep, kept thinking about everything that's happened, how different my life is now from a year ago. Regrets? His voice was carefully neutral. Not a single one. She held out her hand and he took it, letting her pull him close. I was just thinking about James, about how I used to stand here waiting for him, imagining the life we'd have.
That life died with him. But this life, the one we're building, it's better because it's real, because it's built on truth instead of fantasy. He'd be glad you found happiness. Any man who loved you would want that for you. I think he would. I think he'd like you, actually. You're both good men who tried to do right by people. She leaned into Caleb's warmth. Tomorrow I'm going to marry you, and the day after that I'm going to wake up as your wife, and every day after that I'm going to choose you again. That's my promise. Not waiting anymore. Just living and loving and building our future together. That's all I've ever wanted. To be chosen, to belong somewhere, to have a reason to stay. His arms tightened around her. Thank you for giving me that, for seeing past the grief to who I could be. Thank you for the same. They stood together in the moonlight, on the spot where Evelyn had waited so long for a ghost, now holding something real and warm and present. The wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. Tomorrow would bring new beginnings, but tonight was for honoring what had come before, the loss and grief that had shaped them both into people capable of building something beautiful from broken pieces. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, Wyoming sky brilliant blue and cloudless. Evelyn dressed with Margaret's help, her hands trembling as her sister fastened the buttons down her back. You look beautiful, Margaret whispered, tears in her eyes. Like yourself again, but better, stronger. Evelyn studied herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was 29 years old, marked by grief but not defeated by it. Her eyes were clear and bright, no longer haunted by endless waiting. She looked like someone who'd survived and learned and was ready to build instead of just endure. I'm ready, she said. Let's go get married. The ceremony was held in the yard under the open sky with the prairie stretching endlessly behind them. Chairs had been arranged in neat rows, already filling with neighbors and friends. Ruth and her children sat in front, Tommy between them, dressed in his new suit and grinning so wide his face looked like it might split. William Garrett and his daughter were there, offering genuine happiness for this new chapter. Jacob Thompson from the hardware store, who'd once proposed and been gently refused, tipped his hat in congratulation. And at the front, standing with the preacher, was Caleb. He'd cleaned up for the occasion, new shirt, dark trousers, hair slicked back, face freshly shaved. But it was his expression that made Evelyn's breath catch. He looked at her like she was everything, like the answer to every question he'd been asking for 12 years. Robert offered his arm, and Evelyn took it, letting her father lead her down the makeshift aisle. With each step, she felt the past falling away. The girl who'd waited at the fence, the woman who'd grieved a ghost, the version of herself who'd been too scared to hope. All of it fading, making room for who she was becoming. When they reached the front, Robert placed her hand in Caleb's with simple dignity. Take care of my girl, he said gruffly. She survived more than most people could. She deserves happiness. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure she has it, Caleb promised. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They spoke traditional vows, promising to love and honor through whatever came, but they also added their own words, speaking directly to each other, honest and vulnerable. I promise to stay, Caleb said, his voice carrying across the assembled witnesses. I promise to choose you every day, to work through the hard times instead of running, to build a home with you that's safe and full of love. I promise to be a father to Tommy and any other children we're blessed with. And I promise to love you not in spite of your scars, but because of them, because they made you into the strongest, bravest person I've ever known. Evelyn's voice shook but held steady. I promise to trust you. I promise to believe in our future even when fear tells me to protect myself. I promise to let you in, to share my grief and my joy, to build this life alongside you as an equal partner. I promise to love the man you are and the man you're becoming. And I promise to never make you wait. You'll always know where you stand with me, what you mean to me, how much I choose you. Tommy was called forward then for the adoption ceremony. The preacher had them all join hands, Evelyn, Caleb, and Tommy forming a small circle, and spoke words about family being more than blood, about love being a choice renewed daily, about three people becoming one unit while maintaining their individual worth. Do you, Caleb Ross, take this boy as your son? Will you raise him with love and discipline, provide for him, teach him, and give him the security of knowing he belongs to you as surely as if he'd been born to you? I do. I will. Caleb's eyes were wet, his voice fierce with emotion. Tommy, you're my son in every way that matters. I'm going to love you and protect you and be here for you every single day. That's a promise. And do you, Tommy Hayes, accept Caleb Ross as your father? Will you honor him and let him guide you, knowing that his love for you is real and permanent? Tommy looked between them, his young face serious. I do. And I want to be Tommy Ross now, if that's okay. I want to have a family name, a real family. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. The preacher smiled and nodded. Then by the power vested in me and the laws of Wyoming Territory, I declare you a family. Caleb and Evelyn Ross and their son Tommy Ross. What's been joined here today, let no one separate. The kiss Caleb gave her was tender and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Tommy launched himself at them both, and they stood together as a family for the first time, holding each other while their community applauded and cheered. The reception lasted long into the evening, with food and music and dancing. Evelyn was passed from partner to partner, her father, William Garrett, various ranchers she barely knew, but who wanted to wish her well. But always her eyes found Caleb, watching him dance with Tommy, laughing with Ruth, fitting into her life with an ease that felt miraculous. When the sun finally set and the stars emerged, Caleb found her at the edge of the celebration. Ready to escape? Where would we go? I built us something, out past the east pasture, wanted it to be a surprise. He held out his hand. Come with me? They slipped away from the party, Tommy safely in Catherine's care, and walked hand in hand across the darkening prairie. A quarter-mile from the main house, Evelyn saw it, a small cabin, newly built, with warm light glowing in the windows. You built this? When? Past 6 weeks. Had help from your father and some of the other men. Wanted us to have our own space, somewhere that's just ours. He led her inside and Evelyn gasped. The cabin was simple but beautiful. One large room with a kitchen area, a bed in the corner, a fireplace already crackling with warmth. Furniture that Caleb must have either built or bought. A table, chairs, shelves for books. Curtains that looked suspiciously like Margaret's handiwork. And on the mantel, a photograph in a simple frame. Evelyn moved closer and felt her breath catch. It was a picture of James Albright in his cavalry uniform, the same one she'd carried in her locket for so long. Beside it was a newer photograph of Tommy with his mother, taken before the wagon train that had ended in tragedy. I thought, Caleb said quietly, coming up behind her, that we shouldn't forget the people who made us who we are. James and Rebecca and Tommy's mother, they're part of our story too. Not the whole story anymore, but part of it. I wanted them to have a place here, in the home we're building. Tears streamed down Evelyn's face. The gesture was so thoughtful, so understanding of the complicated grief they both carried. This is perfect. You're perfect. I'm not perfect, but I'm yours, and that's enough. He turned her in his arms, wiping away her tears with gentle thumbs. Welcome home, Mrs. Ross. Mrs. Ross. The name felt strange and wonderful, a new identity to grow into. Not the woman who'd waited at the fence, not James Albright's abandoned fiancée, but Caleb Ross's wife. Tommy Ross's mother. A woman building a future instead of mourning a past. Welcome home, she echoed, rising on her toes to kiss him. Welcome home to both of us. That night they claimed their new beginning with gentle hands and whispered words, learning each other's bodies the way they'd been learning each other's hearts, slowly, carefully, with reverence for all they'd survived to reach this moment. When they finally lay tangled together in the darkness, Evelyn felt a peace she'd never known. Not the absence of grief, that would always be part of her, but the presence of something stronger. Love earned through suffering, joy claimed despite loss, hope that had been tested and proven real. Tell me about Rebecca, she murmured against Caleb's chest. I want to know about her. So he told her, his voice rough with old grief that had finally begun to heal. He told her about the gentle Kansas girl who'd agreed to marry him after a brief courtship, about the 6 months they'd had together before he left for work and returned to find her gone. He told her about the daughter he'd never met, never held, who died fighting to be born. And Evelyn told him more about James, Not just the perfect memory she'd preserved, but the real man. The way he'd snored, the terrible jokes he'd told, the times he'd been moody or distant, making him human instead of saintly, honoring him by being honest about who he'd really been. They'd like each other, Caleb said eventually. Our ghosts. I think they'd be glad we found each other. I think so too. Evelyn pressed a kiss to his shoulder. Thank you for not being afraid of my grief, for understanding that letting go of James doesn't mean forgetting him. Thank you for the same, for making space for Rebecca in our life instead of asking me to pretend she never existed. His arms tightened around her. We're going to make this work, Evelyn. All the mess and complications and grief, we're going to build something good anyway. I know we will, because we're choosing it. Every day, we're choosing each other and this life and the hard work of being happy. She tilted her head up to look at him in the darkness. That's all love really is, isn't it? The daily choice to stay, to work through problems, to keep building even when it's hard. Yeah, that's what I think too. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when morning came, Evelyn woke to find sunlight streaming through the windows and Caleb already up, making coffee in their new kitchen. She lay watching him for a moment, this man who'd stopped running long enough to build a home, marveling at the strange paths that had brought them here. A knock on the door interrupted her reverie. Caleb answered it to find Tommy standing there in his nightshirt, having clearly escaped from the main house. Good morning, Papa, Tommy said, trying out the word with shy pride. Is Mama awake? Grandma says I'm supposed to give you both privacy, but I wanted to make sure you didn't leave without saying goodbye. Caleb's face did something complicated, joy and pain and overwhelming love all mixed together. We're not going anywhere, son. We're right here, and we're staying. Come on in. Tommy bounded inside and launched himself onto the bed, burrowing between them with the casual possessiveness of a child who finally felt secure. Evelyn wrapped her arms around him, breathing in the little boy's smell of him, feeling her heart expand to hold all this love. This is nice, Tommy announced. Having a mama and papa and a house where we're all together, this is what a real family feels like, right? This is exactly what a real family feels like, Evelyn confirmed, meeting Caleb's eyes over Tommy's head. Messy and imperfect and more wonderful than anything we could have planned. They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them tangled together in morning sunlight, and Evelyn felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Not just happiness, that was too simple a word, but rightness. The bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the people she was meant to be with, building exactly the life she was meant to build. The fence post still stood on the eastern edge of the property, the brass plaque catching light when the sun hit it right, but Evelyn didn't visit it anymore. Didn't need to. The waiting was over, the grief transformed into something she could carry without being crushed. She'd found what she'd been searching for, not in the life she'd imagined with James, but in the life she'd built with Caleb and Tommy. Different from her dreams, but better, because it was real. Summer settled over Wyoming with the lazy heat of long days and short nights. The cabin filled with the rhythms of their new life. Morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, Tommy's laughter as Caleb taught him to ride, evening meals where they talked about their days and made plans for tomorrow. Simple things, ordinary things, things made precious by how hard they'd fought to reach them. One evening in late August, as the three of them sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Tommy asked the question Evelyn had been waiting for. Are you going to have more children? I wouldn't mind having a brother or sister. Caleb's hand found Evelyn's, squeezing gently. They'd talked about this late at night when Tommy was asleep, wondering if they dared hope for more children or if they should be grateful for what they had. Would you like that? Evelyn asked carefully. You'd have to share us with a baby. That's not always easy. I know, but I think I'd be a good big brother. I could teach them things like Mr. Ross, like Papa, teaches me things. And it would be nice to not be the only kid. Tommy leaned against her shoulder. Plus, babies are cute. Sarah's family had a baby last year, and it was really cute. Caleb looked at Evelyn, question in his eyes. She thought about everything they'd survived to reach this point, the losses that had carved them hollow, the grief that had nearly destroyed them, the long, slow climb back to hope. A baby would be vulnerable, precious, terrifying. But it would also be proof that life continued, that joy could be rebuilt, that love was stronger than loss. "I think that would be wonderful," she said softly. "A baby that's ours, all three of ours from the beginning, building our family even bigger." The smile Caleb gave her was incandescent. He pulled her close, Tommy between them, and they sat watching the Wyoming sky fade from gold to purple to the star-studded black of full night. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled. The wind whispered across the prairie. And in their small cabin, with its glowing windows, three people who'd survived the worst life could offer sat together planning their future. Not waiting anymore. Not grieving anymore. Just living, fully and presently, with all the messy, imperfect beauty that living entailed. And on the eastern edge of the property, the fence post stood silent witness to what had been and what would be. The brass plaque caught starlight, its inscription a reminder that sometimes the longest waits end, not in disappointment, but in joy beyond imagining. That faith, however tested, can lead to finding. That the people we lose shape us into the people we need to be to recognize love when it finally, impossibly, miraculously comes home. For Evelyn Moore, no, Evelyn Ross now, who'd waited with faith. For Caleb Ross, who'd found her at last. For Tommy Ross, who'd wished them all together. And for the life they were building, one day and one choice at a time, from grief's ashes into something whole and real and theirs. The waiting was over. The finding had just begun. And in the end, that was enough. That was everything. That was home.